Welcome to Unclassified Horror, where we uncover the darkest secrets hidden in the wilderness. I'm your host, bringing you true stories from the places most people fear to go. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and join our community of truth seekers. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from right now. Now, let's dive into tonight's story. The stone cabin on Raven's Peak had been watching over the Appalachian ridgeline for nearly 200 years. Built by settlers who thought they could tame these mountains, abandoned when they learned otherwise, and eventually claimed by the National Forest Service as a maintenance station. Though station was generous for what amounted to 4 stone walls, a slate roof that leaked, and a fireplace that drew smoke more often than it vented it. I'd volunteered for the overnight stay. Someone needed to repair the weather monitoring equipment bolted to the cabin's north wall, and the hike up was brutal enough that most rangers found excuses to avoid it. But I'd always liked the isolation up here. At 6,200 feet, Raven's Peak was one of the highest points in this section of the Appalachians, high enough that the clouds often passed below you, leaving you floating in a sea of white with only the surrounding peaks breaking through like islands. High enough that you could see for miles in every direction when the weather was clear. High enough that other things could see you too. I reached the cabin around 4 p.m., my legs burning from the climb. The trail up Raven's Peak gained nearly 3,000 feet in just over 4 miles, switchbacking up the mountain's eastern face through dense hardwood forest that eventually gave way to stunted spruce and exposed rock. The last half-mile was above treeline, scrambling over loose scree with nothing but sky above and a stomach-turning drop below. The cabin sat in a small saddle between Raven's Peak's main summit and a subsidiary bump to the north. Someone had chosen the location well, sheltered from the worst of the wind, with a spring trickling out of the rocks nearby and a view that made the brutal hike worthwhile. To the east, the Piedmont stretched away in layers of blue haze. To the west, wave after wave of mountain ridges marched toward the horizon, each one a shade lighter than the last until they faded into sky. And directly north, across a narrow gap maybe 300 yards wide, stood Carrion Ridge. The name had always bothered me. Most of the peaks around here had Cherokee names, or descriptive ones given by early settlers: Bald Mountain, Water Rock Knob, Cold Spring Gap. But Carrion Ridge had earned its name more recently, sometime in the 1800s, after a series of mysterious die-offs had left the ridge littered with dead birds. Hundreds of them, ravens and crows mostly, just dropped from the sky over the course of a single night. The locals had burned the carcasses and avoided the ridge for decades afterward. Even now, nothing grew on Carrion Ridge's summit. While every other peak in the area was either forested or covered in low scrub, Carrion Ridge's highest point was just bare rock, a dark, jagged spine that caught the last light of day and held it like a blade. I tried not to look at it as I unlocked the cabin door. The interior was exactly as I'd left it 6 months ago during my last maintenance check. One room, maybe 15 feet square, with the fireplace taking up most of the west wall. A rough wooden table and chair, a cot with a thin mattress that smelled of mildew, shelves holding emergency supplies, first aid kit, weather radio, spare batteries, water purification tablets, a propane lantern hanging from a hook in the ceiling beam, and windows, 3 of them. One facing east toward the parking lot 4 miles below, one facing south toward the main ridgeline, and one facing north toward Carrion Ridge. I set down my pack and got to work. The weather station's anemometer had been reporting erratic wind speeds for months, probably because ice had damaged the bearings during the winter. I'd need to disassemble it, clean everything, re-grease the moving parts, and calibrate it against my handheld unit. 4, maybe 5 hours of work if everything went smoothly. I started with the external repairs while I still had good light. The anemometer mount was on the north wall, naturally, because that's where the prevailing winds came from. I had to lean out the window to reach it, my upper body hanging over a drop that would kill me just as dead as any other 1,000-foot fall. The sun was getting low, painting Carrion Ridge in shades of amber and gold, beautiful in a stark kind of way. The bare rocks seemed to glow from within, and for a moment I could almost understand why someone would build a cabin up here despite the difficulty of access. There was something about being this high, this exposed, that made you feel both insignificant and transcendent. That's when I noticed the figure. At first, I thought it was a rock formation. Carrion Ridge's summit was maybe a quarter-mile away across the gap, close enough to make out details in the fading light. And there, standing on the highest point of the ridge, was what looked like a pillar of stone. Tall, taller than it should be, taller than any natural formation had a right to be. I pulled my binoculars from my pack and focused on the summit. Not a rock formation. A person, or something shaped like a person, standing utterly still, facing toward the cabin. The figure was massive. Even at this distance, even allowing for perspective, I could tell it was far larger than any human. 8 feet tall? Maybe more. It was hard to judge scale without context, but something about the proportions was wrong. The shoulders too broad, the limbs too long, the head was wrong. I couldn't make out details. The light was fading fast now, but the shape wasn't right. Too elongated, too angular, and there was something draped over the whole figure, a cloak or robe that hung motionless despite the wind I could feel buffeting the cabin. I pulled myself back through the window and latched it shut. Not that a latch would do anything against whatever that was, but the small act of securing the cabin made me feel marginally better. I lit the propane lantern and checked my phone. No signal, of course. We were too high and too isolated for cell coverage. The cabin had a satellite phone for emergencies, hardwired into the wall with a dedicated solar panel on the roof. But what would I say? That there was someone standing on Carrion Ridge? That I was spooked by a hiker with bad fashion sense? I made myself sit down at the table and eat dinner. Trail mix and jerky washed down with water from my bottle. My hands were shaking slightly, and I told myself it was just the cold. The temperature was dropping fast now that the sun was down. I should light a fire in the fireplace. But lighting a fire meant going to the north window again, meant turning my back on it while I arranged kindling and struck matches, meant illuminating the cabin interior while leaving everything outside in darkness. I left the fire unlit and pulled on my heavy jacket instead. The lantern cast dancing shadows on the stone walls. Outside the windows, I could see nothing but blackness and a scattering of stars. Too dark now to see Carrion Ridge or what stood on it. Maybe the figure had left. Maybe it had been a trick of the light all along, a weirdly shaped rock that my tired brain had interpreted as something sinister. I pulled out my maintenance log and tried to focus on filling out the day's entry. Date, arrival time, weather conditions, work completed. My handwriting looked shaky on the page. Then I made the mistake of looking at the north window. The figure was closer. Not on Carrion Ridge anymore. Not on the summit where I'd first seen it. Now it was on the near side of the ridge, at the edge of the gap that separated the two peaks. Still standing motionless. Still facing the cabin. Still impossibly large. I grabbed my spotlight, a powerful LED unit that could throw a beam for half a mile, and aimed it out the north window. My hands fumbled with the switch. The beam lanced out into the darkness, and I swept it across the gap toward where I'd seen it. The light found it immediately. God. Oh, God. It was massive. Not 8 feet tall. 12 maybe, or 15. The cloak covered it from head to foot, a heavy fabric that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The hood was deep, so deep that the spotlight couldn't penetrate it. Where the face should be, there was only shadow, empty, absolute. But I could feel it looking at me. The figure stood at the very edge of Carrion Ridge, close enough now that I could see details. The cloak wasn't fabric, it was something else, something that moved wrong, that flowed and shifted even though there was no wind. And beneath the hem, where feet should be, nothing. The cloak simply ended and there was nothing beneath it. The figure wasn't standing on the ground, it was floating just above it, hovering at the edge of the 1,000-foot drop like gravity was optional. I killed the spotlight, plunged the night back into darkness. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. The lantern light suddenly seemed far too bright, making the cabin a glowing beacon in the darkness, making me visible. I turned down the propane until the flame was barely a flicker, sat in the near darkness, listening to my own breathing, listening to the wind outside, the creaking of the cabin's old timbers, the sound of my pulse in my ears. And underneath it all, another sound, faint, rhythmic, like breathing but too slow, too deep, each inhalation lasting 10 seconds, 15, 20, each exhalation a sigh that I could almost feel through the cabin walls. Something was breathing, and it wasn't me. I don't know how long I sat there in the darkness, long enough for my eyes to adjust, long enough to make out the shapes of the furniture around me, the darker rectangles of the windows, long enough to realize that the north window was getting brighter. Not sunrise, it was only 9 p.m. I could see the time glowing on my watch face, but the north window was definitely getting brighter, as if something outside was emitting a faint luminescence. I approached the window slowly, staying to the side, not wanting to silhouette myself against the interior, pressed my face against the cold glass, and looked out. The figure stood in the same place, but now it was glowing, a soft, pale light that seemed to come from within the cloak itself, pulsing in rhythm with that slow, deep breathing. The light didn't illuminate anything around it, didn't light up the rocks beneath it or the air around it. It was simply there, a vertical column of dim radiance hanging in the darkness like a pillar of foxfire. And it was watching the cabin. I knew this with absolute certainty, even though I still couldn't see anything beneath that hood. The attention was physical, tangible, a pressure against my skin like standing too close to a fire. My satellite phone hung on the wall beside the north window. I grabbed it and punched in the emergency number for the ranger station. The phone clicked and whirred as it searched for a satellite connection. "Dispatch, this is Raven's Peak Cabin. Do you copy?" Static. Then a voice, distant and distorted. "Copy, Raven's Peak. This is dispatch. What's your status?" There's someone on Carrion Ridge. Someone watching the cabin." A pause. "Say again? You have a visual on a person?" "Something. I don't know what it is. It's big, really big, and it's just standing there." Another pause, longer this time. "Derek, is this a prank? Because I'm not joking. There's something out there." Okay, stay calm. Can you describe what you're seeing?" I looked out the window again. The figure hadn't moved. "It's maybe 12 feet tall, wearing some kind of cloak. It's glowing. It's been watching the cabin for hours." The pause that followed was long enough that I thought I'd lost the connection. Then, "Derek, there's a storm system moving in. Should hit your location around midnight. You're probably seeing some kind of atmospheric phenomenon. St. Elmo's fire, maybe, or this isn't St. Elmo's fire. This is something alive. Listen, you're at 6,200 feet. You've been hiking all day. The altitude can cause... I know what altitude sickness feels like. This isn't that. Then come down. If you're feeling unsafe, pack your gear and start down the trail. We'll have someone meet you at the trailhead." I looked out at the darkness beyond the cabin, at the narrow trail that wound down the mountain through miles of forest, at the thing standing on Carrion Ridge that could certainly move faster than I could hike. "I don't think that's a good idea. Derek, I'm staying in the cabin. I'll call you in the morning. Wait! I hung up, set the phone back on its hook with shaking hands. The dispatcher was probably right. This was probably some kind of hallucination brought on by altitude and exhaustion and too many nights alone in the mountains. In the morning, I'd laugh about this. In the morning, the figure would be gone, and there would be nothing on Carrion Ridge but rocks and sky. I just had to make it to morning. Around 10 p.m., the wind picked up. Not the steady blow that usually swept across these high ridges, but gusts that hit the cabin like physical blows, making the old structure groan and shudder. The temperature dropped sharply. I could see my breath in the lantern light. The storm was coming, just like the dispatcher had said. I lit the fireplace because hypothermia was a more immediate threat than whatever was outside. The flames caught quickly, and soon I had a good blaze going. The heat felt wonderful, and the light pushed back the darkness in a way that the failing lantern couldn't. But the firelight also meant that anyone, anything outside could see in perfectly. The windows turned into bright rectangles, advertisements of my presence. I hung my sleeping bag over the north window like a curtain, blocking the view both ways. Then I sat by the fire and tried to convince myself I was safe. The storm hit around 11 p.m. Rain first, then sleet, hammering against the slate roof and the stone walls. Lightning flickered, illuminating the cabin in strobing white flashes. Thunder rolled across the mountains, so loud and sustained that it sounded like the sky was tearing itself apart. I should have been terrified of the storm. Up here, exposed on the ridge, lightning strikes were a real danger. But all I could think about was what was outside, standing in the deluge, still watching, still waiting. During one lightning flash, I pulled back the sleeping bag curtain and looked out the north window. The figure hadn't moved. Rain sheeted off the cloak like it was covered in oil. Lightning struck somewhere behind it, silhouetting that impossible shape against the white light, and for just a moment I saw something beneath the hood. Not a face. Faces have features, eyes, nose, mouth. This had none of those. What I saw in that fraction of a second illumination was smooth and featureless, like looking at a blank mask, or a void, a nothing that somehow looked back. I dropped the sleeping bag curtain and returned to the fire. My whole body was shaking now, and not from the cold. I fed more wood into the flames, making them burn brighter, higher. The fire was a comfort, a piece of human civilization, a thing that said I existed, I am here, I am real. The breathing sound had gotten louder. I could hear it clearly now, even over the storm, that slow, rhythmic inhalation and exhalation that seemed to come from all directions at once. The cabin itself seemed to breathe in rhythm with it, the walls expanding and contracting slightly with each cycle. I put my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The sound wasn't in the air. It was deeper than that, in the stone, in the ground, in my bones. Around 1 a.m., the storm began to break up. The rain dwindled to a drizzle, then stopped. The wind calmed. Through the east window, I could see gaps opening in the clouds, stars visible between the ragged edges. The fire had burned down to coals. I added more wood automatically, not really thinking about it, just needing the light and heat. The lantern had finally exhausted its propane and gone dark. I heard a sound from outside. Not the breathing, that had been constant for hours. This was different. Movement, the scrape of something heavy against stone. Footsteps. The figure was moving. I grabbed the spotlight again and went to the north window, pulled back the sleeping bag curtain. The moon had broken through the clouds, bright enough to see by, and what I saw made my bladder almost let go. The figure was halfway across the gap, not walking, not flying, just moving, gliding across the empty air between Carrion Ridge and Raven's Peak like the 1,000-foot drop beneath it didn't exist. The cloak flowed and shifted, and beneath it I could see nothing, no legs, no body, just shadow and that faint internal luminescence. It was coming to the cabin. I aimed the spotlight and turned it on. The beam hit the figure square in the chest, or where a chest should be, and something impossible happened. The light didn't reflect, didn't scatter. It hit the cloak and simply stopped, absorbed completely, like water soaking into parched earth. I could see the beam traveling through the air, a solid column of light extending from the window to the figure. But where it struck, nothing. A perfect circle of absolute darkness. And the circle was expanding. The blackness expanded outward from the point of impact, flowing across the cloak like ink in water. Within seconds, the entire figure was consumed by this darkness, becoming a shape cut from the fabric of night itself, a hole in the world. But it kept coming. I dropped the spotlight, heard it clatter on the floor. The figure was close now, maybe 50 yards away, still gliding through the air, still moving toward the cabin with that inexorable patience. I ran to the door. My hands fumbled with the bolt. When had I locked it? I didn't remember locking it. And finally got it open. Cold air rushed in, and I stumbled out into the night. The moonlight seemed impossibly bright after hours in the firelit cabin. I could see the trail descending the mountain to the east, a pale ribbon of crushed stone and exposed earth. 4 miles to the parking lot. 4 miles of steep, treacherous terrain in the dark. I ran anyway. I made it maybe 100 yards before I looked back. The figure had stopped. It hovered in front of the cabin's north window, completely motionless. The moonlight passed through it in places, or around it. I couldn't tell which. It was like looking at a heat shimmer, the distortion in reality that hurt to focus on. As I watched, it raised one arm. Not quickly, not in any kind of threat, just a slow, deliberate gesture, like it was pointing, or beckoning, or waving goodbye. The arm was too long. The limb that extended from beneath the cloak was at least 6 feet from shoulder to fingertips, jointed in too many places, ending in something that might have been a hand but had too many fingers, or too few. I couldn't quite make myself understand what I was seeing. My brain kept sliding away from it, refusing to process the image. Then the figure turned, not walking, not pivoting. It simply oriented in a different direction, facing back toward Carrion Ridge. And with that same patient gliding motion, it began to move away. I stood there in the cold darkness, watching it cross back over the gap, watching it reach Carrion Ridge and descend to the summit without ever touching the ground, watching it return to the exact spot where I'd first seen it hours ago. And there it stopped, facing the cabin, waiting, or watching. I looked at the trail descending into darkness, looked at the cabin with its door standing open and firelight spilling out, looked at my gear inside, my pack, my food, my emergency supplies. The figure had stopped. It had approached, yes, but it had also stopped, and then it had retreated. That gesture it had made, I'd interpreted it as a wave, but maybe it was something else. Maybe it was a command. Leave. But it hadn't forced me to leave, hadn't attacked, hadn't even entered the cabin. It had simply insisted, suggested, made its wishes known. And I had fled. I stood there shivering for another minute, then made a decision that I knew was probably stupid. I walked back to the cabin. The figure didn't move as I approached. I kept my eyes on it as I slipped through the door, grabbed my pack and shouldered it, grabbed my spotlight from where I'd dropped it, took one last look at the fire burning in the hearth. Then I left. Pulled the door shut behind me, but didn't lock it. If something that could fly through the air wanted to get into the cabin, a locked door wouldn't stop it. I started down the trail, moving as fast as I dared in the darkness. Every few minutes, I'd look back at Raven's Peak, at the dark bulk of the mountains silhouetted against the starlit sky. The figure never moved. It stood on Carrion Ridge like a sentinel, watching me go. I reached the parking lot as dawn was breaking, my legs trembling with exhaustion. My truck sat alone in the gravel lot, exactly where I'd left it. I'd never been so happy to see that beat-up old Ranger in my life. I got in, locked the doors, and sat there shaking for 10 minutes before I could make my hands steady enough to get the key in the ignition. I didn't report what happened. What was I going to say? I filed my maintenance report as incomplete due to severe weather and requested that someone else handle the cabin's equipment on a clear day with proper support. But I couldn't stop thinking about it, about that figure standing vigil on Carrion Ridge, about the way it had absorbed light like a black hole swallows stars, about that gesture it had made. Leave. Go. This place is not for you. 2 weeks later, I went back, not to the cabin. I'd probably never set foot in that cabin again, but to the Forest Service archives, looking for anything that might explain what I'd seen. I found references to Carrion Ridge going back to the 1700s, Cherokee stories about Sekilili, the night goer, a spirit that watched over high places and judged those who came too close to the sky. Settler accounts of the Dark Watcher seen on various peaks throughout the Appalachians. Reports of missing hikers whose bodies were found in impossible locations, as if they'd been carried by something that could fly. And I found incident reports. Rangers and hikers over the decades who'd reported seeing a tall figure in dark clothing standing on distant peaks. Always at night, always watching. The reports were always filed as misidentification or atmospheric phenomenon or exhaustion-induced hallucination. But there were too many of them, too many spanning too many years, too many describing the exact same thing. Last month, I talked to Ben Foster, one of our oldest rangers. He's been working these mountains for 40 years, knows every trail and peak like they're old friends. I asked him about Carrion Ridge, about why the summit stays bare when everything around it grows green. He gave me a long look, then said, "Some places belong to older things than us, Derek. The Cherokee knew it. The settlers learned it. We just keep forgetting." "Have you seen it?" I asked. "Once," he said. "Summer of '88. I was doing an overnight at Raven's Peak just like you. Woke up around 2 a.m. and looked out the window, and there it was. Tallest damn thing I ever saw, and I'm 6'4" myself. It just stood there all night, watching. Come dawn, it was gone." "What do you think it was?" "I don't know. Guardian, maybe, or a warning. Something that wants us to remember that these mountains were here long before we were, and they'll be here long after we." He paused. "Did it hurt you?"
Yesterday, a new ranger asked to take the overnight shift at Raven's Peak. Fresh out of training, eager to prove herself, wanting to experience the solitude and beauty of a high mountain night. I told her no. Told her the equipment could wait. Told her we'd send a team up during daylight hours with proper support. She asked why, and I didn't have a good answer. Not one I could put in an official report. So I just said that the cabin needed structural repairs before it was safe for overnight stays. She accepted that, thank God. But I saw her looking at me strangely, like she could tell I wasn't being completely honest. Maybe someday I'll tell her the truth. Maybe when she's been working these mountains long enough to know that not everything can be explained, that there are things in the high places that we're not meant to understand. For now, the cabin on Raven's Peak sits empty. The weather station's anemometer still reports erratic readings. The maintenance log shows my incomplete report from November, and nothing since. And on clear nights, if you climb to one of the nearby peaks and look toward Carrion Ridge at the right time, you might see it.
A tall figure in a dark cloak, standing perfectly still on the summit, watching, waiting, guarding something we are not meant to see. I went back once more, 3 days after my encounter, not to the cabin, but close enough to see it from a distance, close enough to use my binoculars and check on something I needed to verify. The north wall of the cabin, where I'd aimed my spotlight at the figure, where the beam had been absorbed into that impossible darkness, bore a mark, a perfect circle, maybe 6 feet in diameter, scorched into the stone, not burned like fire would burn, but changed. The rock was darker there, smoother, like it had been exposed to incredible heat and then cooled too fast, or like it had been touched by something that existed outside the normal rules of temperature and matter. The mark is still there. I checked the maintenance records, and no one has reported it. Maybe no one's been close enough to notice. Maybe it's only visible from certain angles. Or maybe everyone who sees it does what I did, makes a note, files it away, tries to forget. But I can't forget. Because 3 weeks ago, I found something in my truck, something that hadn't been there before, that I know I didn't bring back from the mountain. It was sitting on my dashboard when I came out of the ranger station after a long shift. Small, maybe 3 inches long, lying there like it had always been there and I just hadn't noticed. A feather. Black. Blacker than any bird feather I'd ever seen. So black it seemed to absorb light the same way that cloaked figure had. But it was warm to the touch. Warm like it had just come from a living creature. I keep it in my desk drawer now. I take it out sometimes, late at night when the station is empty and I'm alone with my thoughts. Hold it up to the light and watch the way the light bends around it, or through it, or simply stops at its surface. It's a reminder, I think. A message. The mountains remember. The high places are watched, and some things are patient enough to wait forever, standing sentinel on bare stone peaks, making sure we remember our place in the old order of things. I never did finish repairing that anemometer. The readings are still erratic, spinning up to impossible speeds and then dropping to 0 for no apparent reason. The maintenance schedule says it's due for service, but the cabin on Raven's Peak can wait. It's waited for 200 years. It can wait a little longer. And the figure on Carrion Ridge, the watchman, I've started calling it in my head, will be there whenever we're ready to return, standing motionless, facing the cabin, waiting with the patience of stone and the memory of mountains. Some nights I dream I'm back in that cabin, the fire burning low, the storm raging outside, and when I look out the north window, the figure is closer than it should be, close enough to touch, and that featureless face beneath the hood is looking at me with an attention that feels like it could see straight through skin and bone to whatever soul I have left. In the dream, it speaks, not with words, not with sound, but with a voice that resonates in my chest like distant thunder. You were permitted to leave. Not all are. Remember this gift. Remember what watches from the high places. Remember that mercy, once given, may not be given twice. I always wake up from that dream with my heart racing and the taste of ozone in my mouth, like I've been too close to a lightning strike. The feather is always warmer afterward, just a little, just enough to notice. I think someday I'll have to go back, not because I want to, because the mountains will call me back, because the watchman on Carrion Ridge isn't finished with me yet, because there are things in the high places that demand witnesses, even if we don't understand what we're witnessing. But not yet. For now, I stay in the lower elevations. I take the easy trails. I let other rangers handle the high peaks and the overnight stays. And on clear nights, when the mountains are visible from my window, I look toward Raven's Peak and wonder if it's looking back, if the watchman is still there, standing on Carrion Ridge, still waiting, still watching, still remembering.
The emergency line rang at 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday in late September. I was 3 hours into a quiet night shift at the Blue Ridge Ranger Station when the phone lit up with an automated alert. Cell signal detected. Restricted Zone Alpha 7. Emergency protocol initiated.
My name is Marcus Reed. I've been a ranger in the Appalachian Mountain System for 9 years. Stationed in North Carolina's most remote sector. Zone Alpha 7 is 4,000 acres of protected wilderness, closed to public access since 2019 due to unstable terrain and dangerous wildlife corridors. No one should be in there. No one with a functioning brain cell, anyway. I grabbed my radio and checked the coordinates. The signal was coming from Deep Hollow, a depression in the mountains so thick with old-growth forest that satellite imagery shows nothing but canopy. Hikers who ignore the warning signs and wander in there tend to get disoriented fast. The topography plays tricks on your sense of direction, and the cell coverage is spotty at best. But someone's phone had managed to ping our emergency system. I pulled up the automated recording that had triggered the alert. These systems capture the last few seconds of any 911 call, even if it doesn't connect properly. What I heard made my blood run cold. "Please, someone help us! We're lost! My daughter, she's only 6. She can't walk anymore. Please, we need help now!" A woman's voice. Raw panic. Background noise of a child crying. A man shouting something incoherent. The recording cut off after 8 seconds. I immediately radioed dispatch. "Station 4, this is Reed. I'm responding to the Alpha 7 emergency. Possible lost family, 1 minor child. Initiating search and rescue protocol." "Copy, Reed. Do you need backup?" I checked the coordinates again. Deep Hollow was 3 miles in from the nearest access point, all of it rough terrain and darkness. Backup would take at least 2 hours to assemble and deploy. "Negative. I'm going in alone. Faster response time. I'll radio when I have visual contact." "Understood, Marcus. Be careful. That's bad country at night." I grabbed my pack, checked my equipment. Flashlight, GPS, first aid kit, emergency blanket, water, protein bars. Standard search and rescue loadout. I also took my recording equipment. Whenever we respond to incidents in restricted zones, we're required to document everything for the violation report. I drove to the northern access point and parked my truck at the gate. The trail into Deep Hollow wasn't maintained, just an old fire road from the 1960s that had been mostly reclaimed by the forest. I followed it on foot, moving fast, my flashlight cutting through absolute darkness. The Appalachian forest at night is a different world. The sounds are all wrong. Things move in the underbrush that you never quite see. The trees press in close, and you get the feeling of being watched, evaluated, judged by something that predates human presence in these mountains. I've done hundreds of night rescues. I'm used to the atmosphere, but this felt different. The deeper I went into Deep Hollow, the more oppressive the silence became. No insects, no night birds, just my footsteps and my breathing and the distant sound of wind through the canopy. At 12:34 a.m., I reached the coordinates where the cell signal had originated. A small clearing, maybe 20 feet across, moonlight filtering through a gap in the canopy. and in the center, a family of 3. They had a tent set up, a small camping stove, sleeping bags spread out. The parents were sitting by the stove drinking coffee. The little girl, maybe 6 years old, was asleep in her sleeping bag, peaceful as could be. They looked up when my flashlight found them, surprised but not alarmed. "Oh, hello," the father said, standing. "Are we not supposed to be here?"
I stared at them, trying to reconcile what I was seeing with what I'd heard on the emergency recording. "Sir, did you place an emergency call approximately 45 minutes ago?" He looks confused. "No, we haven't used our phones since we got here. No signal out this far." "Can I see your phone, please?" He pulled it from his pocket and handed it over. I checked the screen. Dead battery, completely drained. "When did it die?" 2 days ago, shortly after we hiked in. We're doing a digital detox camping trip. No phones, no technology, just family time. I turned to his wife. "Ma'am, is your phone working?" She shook her head. "Mine died the same time his did. We figured it was the cold or something draining the batteries faster than normal." I pulled out my own phone and played the recording that had triggered the emergency alert. The woman's face went pale as she heard her own voice screaming for help, heard her daughter crying in the background, heard the raw terror in every word. "That's me," she whispered. "That's my voice. But I never said those things. I never made that call." The father grabbed my phone, replaying the recording, his confusion turning to alarm. "How is this possible? That's definitely Sarah's voice. That's Emily crying. But we've been fine. We've been perfectly safe. Has anything unusual happened since you've been here? Anything strange?" They looked at each other. "No," the father said. "It's been peaceful, quiet. Maybe too quiet, actually. We haven't seen any wildlife at all." "And you're sure neither of you placed the distress call?" "Positive. Our phones have been dead for 2 days." I radioed dispatch. "Station 4, this is Reed. I've located the family. They're safe and uninjured. No emergency situation. Appears to be a false alarm or technical malfunction." "Copy that. Do they need assistance hiking out?" I looked at the family. The father shook his head. "We're good. We were planning to leave in the morning anyway. This is our last night." "Negative, dispatch. They'll self-evacuate in the morning. I'm going to document the incident and conduct a site survey to determine how the call originated." "Understood. Keep us updated." I spent the next hour interviewing the family, taking detailed notes. Their story was consistent. They'd entered Alpha 7 3 days ago through an unofficial trail they'd found online, unaware it was restricted. They'd been camping peacefully, no incidents, no distress. Both their phones had died simultaneously on the first day, which they'd attributed to the remote location and cold temperatures affecting battery life. But someone or something had used a woman's voice to place an emergency call from their exact location while their phones were dead. I set up my recording equipment near their campsite, positioning audio monitors in a perimeter around the clearing. If another call came through, I wanted to capture it from multiple angles. "I'd recommend you pack up tonight and hike out with me. This area is restricted for a reason." The father frowned. "We paid for a 3-day permit." "Sir, this is a restricted zone. There are no permits for this area. Whoever sold you a permit committed fraud." His face fell. "We booked through a website, wildernessexperiences.com. They had a whole section on backcountry Appalachian camping." "That website doesn't exist in our system. You were scammed." The wife looked upset. "So we're trespassing?" "Technically, yes, but I'm not going to cite you. I'm going to strongly recommend you pack up and leave now." They looked at each other, having a silent conversation, then nodded. "Okay, we'll pack up. Give us 20 minutes." I helped them break down their campsite, working quickly and efficiently. The little girl, Emily, woke up during the process and started crying, confused and frightened by the sudden activity. "It's okay, sweetie," her mother said, picking her up.
We're just going on a little adventure." As Sarah comforted her daughter, I heard it. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. A child crying. The exact same crying I'd heard in the emergency recording. I spun around, trying to locate the source. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, echoing through the trees, distorted by the forest acoustics. "Do you hear that?" I asked. The family stopped packing and listened. After a moment, the father shook his head. "I don't hear anything." But I could hear it, clear as day. Emily crying exactly as she'd been crying in the recording, even though she was right here in her mother's arms, quiet now, sucking her thumb. I checked my recording equipment. The monitors were picking it up, all of them, a child's distressed crying coming from multiple directions simultaneously. Then the wife's voice joined in. "Please, someone help us, we're lost." But Sarah's mouth wasn't moving. She was standing right in front of me, silent, holding her daughter. The voice was coming from the forest.
I grabbed my radio. "Dispatch, Reed. I'm experiencing audio anomalies at the Alpha 7 site. Possible equipment malfunction or environmental interference." "What kind of anomalies?" "I'm hearing the emergency call playing back from multiple locations, but the family is right here with me. They're not making the calls." There was a pause. "Reed, are you saying you're hearing ghost calls?" "I'm saying I'm hearing the exact recording that triggered the initial alert, but it's coming from the forest, not from any phone or device." "Copy that. Recommend you evacuate the family immediately and exit the zone." "Already in progress." I helped the family finish packing while the forest continued to play back their voices. The father shouting, the mothers pleading, the daughters crying, all of it echoing through Deep Hollow in a loop that seemed to have no source. We were halfway back to the access road when it stopped, just cut off mid-sentence, leaving only normal forest sounds, insects, wind, the crunch of our footsteps on the trail. "What the hell was that?" the father asked, his voice shaking. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I'm gonna find out." We reached my truck at 2:47 a.m. I radioed ahead to have a patrol car meet us at the visitor center to document the trespassing incident and collect their information. Then I drove them out of the backcountry, relieved to be putting distance between them and whatever was happening in Deep Hollow. At the visitor center, I handed them off to Ranger Chen and filed my preliminary report. The family was issued a warning citation for trespassing in a restricted area, given educational materials about proper permit procedures, and sent on their way. I should have gone off duty, should have gone home, gotten some sleep, filed a complete report in the morning. Instead, I drove back to the northern access point. I needed to understand what had caused those echoes, needed to figure out how a distress call from dead phones had triggered our emergency system, needed to know what was in Deep Hollow that could record and play back human voices with such perfect fidelity. The sun rose at 6:43 a.m. I waited for full daylight, then hiked back into the zone. I reached the clearing where the family had been camping at 8:15 a.m. In daylight, it looked completely ordinary. Just a small gap in the canopy where a large tree had fallen years ago, creating space for a campsite. I retrieved my recording equipment, which had been running all night on battery power. 6 monitors, each with 8 hours of audio data. If anything unusual had happened after I left, it would be captured. I downloaded the files to my laptop and started analyzing them. For the first 3 hours, nothing, just ambient forest sounds. Wind, branches creaking, the occasional bird call. Then at 4:47 a.m., the distress calls started again. "Please, someone help us, we're lost." Sarah's voice, crystal clear, picked up by all 6 monitors simultaneously. But the strange thing was the timing.
Each monitor was positioned at a different distance from the center of the clearing, which meant the sound should have reached them at slightly different times, creating a delay of milliseconds between recordings. But there was no delay. All 6 monitors captured the voice at exactly the same instant, which was physically impossible unless the sound was originating from everywhere at once. I kept listening. The pattern repeated every 17 minutes. The same 8-second clip. Sarah's plea for help, Emily crying, the father shouting, then silence. Then again, 17 minutes later. The loop had continued for 4 hours before stopping at 8:47 a.m., roughly 30 minutes before I'd arrived. I packed up the equipment and started doing a detailed survey of the clearing, looking for anything that might explain the phenomenon. Unusual rock formations, underground caverns that could create acoustic anomalies, electromagnetic interference from mineral deposits. I found nothing. Just normal Appalachian forest, soil, roots, decomposing leaves, the remains of the fallen tree that had created the clearing. Then I noticed something odd about the tree itself. It hadn't fallen naturally. The trunk had been cut, deliberately, precisely. Someone had taken a chainsaw or axe to it years ago, creating the clearing through human intervention rather than natural processes. I examined the cut more closely. It was old, decades old, but I could still see the pattern. And carved into the bark near the cut, barely visible after years of weathering and moss growth, were initials: JM plus KM, 1987. Lover's initials. Someone had carved them into the tree, then cut it down to create a private camping spot. A romantic gesture, maybe, or just vandalism. I took photographs and noted the coordinates. Then I expanded my search pattern, moving in concentric circles around the clearing, looking for any other signs of human activity. 50 yards to the east, I found the burial site. I reached the clearing where the family had been camping at 8:15 a.m. In daylight, it looked completely ordinary. Just a small gap in the canopy where a large tree had fallen years ago, creating space for a campsite. I retrieved my recording equipment, which had been running all night on battery power. 6 monitors, each with 8 hours of audio data. If anything unusual had happened after I left, it would be captured. I downloaded the files to my laptop and started analyzing them. For the first 3 hours, nothing, just ambient forest sounds. Wind, branches creaking, the occasional bird call. Then at 4:47 a.m., the distress calls started again. "Please, someone help us, we're lost." Sarah's voice, crystal clear, picked up by all 6 monitors simultaneously. But the strange thing was the timing. Each monitor was positioned at a different distance from the center of the clearing, which meant the sound should have reached them at slightly different times, creating a delay of milliseconds between recordings. But there was no delay. All 6 monitors captured the voice at exactly the same instant, which was physically impossible unless the sound was originating from everywhere at once. I kept listening. The pattern repeated every 17 minutes. The same 8-second clip. Sarah's plea for help, Emily crying, the father shouting, then silence. Then again, 17 minutes later. The loop had continued for 4 hours before stopping at 8:47 a.m., roughly 30 minutes before I'd arrived. I packed up the equipment and started doing a detailed survey of the clearing, looking for anything that might explain the phenomenon. Unusual rock formations, underground caverns that could create acoustic anomalies, electromagnetic interference from mineral deposits. I found nothing. Just normal Appalachian forest, soil, roots, decomposing leaves, the remains of the fallen tree that had created the clearing. Then I noticed something odd about the tree itself. It hadn't fallen naturally. The trunk had been cut, deliberately, precisely. Someone had taken a chainsaw or axe to it years ago, creating the clearing through human intervention rather than natural processes. I examined the cut more closely. It was old, decades old, but I could still see the pattern. And carved into the bark near the cut, barely visible after years of weathering and moss growth, were initials: JM plus KM, 1987. Lover's initials. Someone had carved them into the tree, then cut it down to create a private camping spot. A romantic gesture, maybe, or just vandalism. I took photographs and noted the coordinates. Then I expanded my search pattern, moving in concentric circles around the clearing, looking for any other signs of human activity. 50 yards to the east, I found the burial site.
Dr. Hayes ran the dental records and bone structure through the database while I sat in my truck, drinking cold coffee and trying to make sense of the evidence. She knocked on my window at 9:47 p.m. She said, "We have preliminary IDs. James Morrison, age 34, Karen Morrison, age 32, Emma Morrison, age 6, reported missing in October 1987, last seen entering the National Forest for a camping trip. Search efforts were extensive but unsuccessful. The case went cold after 6 months." Morrison, I repeated. JM and KM, James and Karen Morrison. The initials in the tree, they were here. They created that clearing. And they died here. I pulled up the photos I'd taken of the fabric fragments. Dr. Hayes, the clothes, the colors and patterns, they match what the family I evacuated was wearing. She frowned. Coincidence. Fashion trends cycle. Similar styles come back. But the toy, the pink rabbit, that's not a coincidence. She didn't have an answer for that. I drove back to the station and pulled the missing persons file on the Morrison family. The photographs were grainy, scanned from 1980s prints, but clear enough. James Morrison looked similar to the father I had evacuated. Same build, same hair color, same facial structure. Karen Morrison could have been Sarah's sister. Same features, same general appearance. And Emma Morrison, smiling in her school photo, looked exactly like Emily. Not similar, exactly. I laid out all the evidence on my desk. The recordings, the graves, the photos, the timeline. The Morrison family disappeared in October 1987, entering the National Forest for a camping trip. They were never found. 37 years later, a family matching their description, wearing similar clothes, carrying a matching toy, camps in the exact spot where the Morrisons were buried. And something in Deep Hollow recorded their distress calls, even though they were safe, even though they never made those calls. The emergency recording had triggered our system at 11:47 p.m. on September 26th. I pulled up the Morrison case file. The search and rescue operation had been launched on October 15, 1987, when the family failed to return from their camping trip. But witnesses had reported seeing them enter the forest on October 13th. They'd been missing for 2 days before anyone realized they were in trouble. 2 days in Deep Hollow. Phones dead, no way to call for help, dying slowly from exposure and hypothermia while search teams looked in the wrong areas. If someone had known where they were, if someone had received an emergency call with their exact coordinates, if someone had responded immediately, they might have survived. I grabbed my phone and called the number the family had given me during their citation processing. It rang 4 times, then went to voicemail. "This is Marcus Reed with the Forest Service. I need you to call me back immediately. It's urgent. Do not return to the Forest Service. Do not go camping in Zone Alpha 7. Please, just call me back." I tried 3 more times. No answer. I checked the visitor log. They'd given an address in Asheville, about 2 hours away. I could drive there, warn them in person, make sure they understood the danger. But what would I tell them? That they might die in a time loop? That something in Deep Hollow was replaying or previewing tragedies? That I'd found graves containing bodies that looked like them? They'd think I was insane. I was starting to think I was insane.
I went back to the audio files, listening to the loop over and over. My voice, definitely my voice, but saying things I'd never said, describing an emergency I'd never encountered. Then I noticed something in the background noise. Underneath my screaming, underneath the family's cries, there was another sound. Static, but not random static. Patterned, rhythmic. I isolated it and ran it through analysis software. It was a voice, multiple voices, speaking in unison, saying the same thing over and over. Witness, remember, warn. Witness, remember, warn. The hair on my neck stood up. I'd heard that phrase before in the reports from Fire Road 47, the creature that marked witnesses, that created a network of people who knew the truth about what lived in these mountains. Deep Hollow was connected, part of the same system, the same ancient mechanism that preserved knowledge, that recorded tragedies, that tried to prevent them from repeating. The Morrison family died because no one knew where they were, because their distress calls never went through, because help arrived too late. And something in Deep Hollow recorded that tragedy, preserved it, turned it into a loop that would play whenever someone camped in that clearing. A warning, a time scream, an echo from the past trying to prevent future deaths. But the recording I'd heard wasn't from the past. It was from the future.
It was me, finding a family that matched the Morrisons' description, realizing too late that history was repeating, screaming for help that wouldn't arrive in time, unless I stopped it. I tried calling the family 17 times over the next 2 hours. No answer, no callback. At midnight, I made a decision. I drove to Asheville, found the address they'd given, and knocked on the door at 2:30 a.m. A man answered, not the father from Deep Hollow, looking annoyed and confused. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for the Harrison family. They gave this address during a Forest Service citation." He frowned. "There's no Harrison family here. We've owned this house for 8 years. You sure you have the right address?" I checked the paperwork. Same address, same name. They might be renting or visiting. Family with a young daughter, about 6 years old? "Nobody like that here. Sorry." He closed the door, leaving me standing on the porch, my mind racing. False address, false names, false information. The family had lied about everything. Or they'd never existed at all. I drove back to the station and pulled up the citation record. The paperwork was there, filled out in my handwriting, but when I tried to access the digital filing system, there was no record, no citation, no family, no incident. I checked the dispatch logs. The emergency call was there at 11:47 p.m. on September 26th, but my response, my radio traffic, my report of finding them safe, gone, deleted, or never entered. I was the only one who remembered evacuating that family. I grabbed my personal recorder, the one I always keep running during incidents, and found the footage from that night. The hike into Deep Hollow was there. The clearing was there. But the family wasn't. In the video, I walked into an empty clearing, talked to no one, packed up equipment that was never unpacked, and hiked back out alone. The video showed me standing in the clearing at 1:23 a.m., looking at empty space, saying, "Sir, did you place an emergency call?" Talking to ghosts, or talking to people who hadn't existed yet, or talking to people who'd existed 37 years ago and were now buried 50 yards east of where I stood. I watched the rest of the footage in growing horror. I helped pack up camping gear that wasn't there. I spoke to people who didn't respond because they weren't present. I heard crying that the microphone didn't capture. I'd experienced a shared hallucination with the past, or the future,
or some collapsed timeline where the Morrison family and the Harrison family and my own future emergency response all existed in the same moment. Deep Hollow wasn't just recording tragedies, it was collapsing time, overlaying past, present, and future, creating zones where all possible outcomes existed simultaneously. The Morrisons had died there in 1987. The Harrisons had camped safely in 2024. And sometime in the future, I would respond to an emergency there, finding a family in distress, screaming for help that wouldn't save them. All three timelines were real. All three were happening. All three were recorded in that 8-second loop. Unless the Harrison family was the Morrison family, reincarnated or time-shifted or somehow given a second chance. And my intervention, my evacuation, my warning had saved them from repeating the tragedy. I checked the calendar, September 26th, 2024, exactly 37 years minus 18 days from when the Morrisons entered the forest. They'd gone in on October 13th, 1987. The Harrisons would be going back. I was certain of it. I had 18 days to figure out how to stop them.
I spent the next week investigating every aspect of the case. The Morrison disappearance, the Harrison family, the audio anomalies in Deep Hollow. What I found terrified me. The Morrison family hadn't been the first deaths in that clearing. Records going back to the 1950s showed a pattern. Every 30 to 40 years, a family of 3 would enter Deep Hollow and never return. Different names, different time periods, but always the same configuration. 2 adults, 1 child, always in October, always in the same general area. 1953, the Patterson family, never found. 1987, the Morrison family, found in 2024, buried in Deep Hollow. 2024, the Harrison family, current. If the pattern held, they would die in October 2024, unless I stopped them. I tried to trace the Harrison family through the information they'd given me. All of it was false or untraceable. The website where they'd booked their permit didn't exist, the phone number went to a disconnected line, the address belonged to strangers. It was as if they'd materialized specifically for that camping trip, given me just enough information to seem real, then vanished back into whatever timeline they'd come from. On October 1st, I set up permanent monitoring equipment in Deep Hollow. Motion sensors, trail cameras, audio recorders. If anyone entered that clearing, I'd know immediately. On October 8th, my equipment detected movement. I was at the station when the alert came through. 9:47 p.m. Motion sensors triggered. Trail cameras showing 3 figures entering the clearing. A man, a woman, a child. The Harrison family. They were back. I grabbed my gear and drove to the access point, my heart pounding. I had to get there before they set up camp, had to convince them to leave, had to break the pattern. I ran the 3 miles to Deep Hollow, pushing myself harder than I'd ever pushed, arriving at the clearing at 10:34 p.m. They were there, setting up the same tent, unpacking the same gear, the little girl playing with her pink rabbit while her parents organized their campsite. "Stop!" I shouted, bursting into the clearing. "You can't be here! You have to leave!" They turned, surprised but not alarmed. The same reaction as before. "Oh, hello," the father said. "Are we not supposed to be here?" The exact same words, the exact same tone. I was living the loop. "You need to evacuate immediately. This area is dangerous. People have died here." The mother frowned. "We have a permit. We paid for 3 days." "That permit is fake. This is a restricted zone. You're in danger." They looked at each other, confused,
concerned but not convinced. "Sir, we're experienced campers. We know what we're doing. We'll be fine." I pulled out my phone and showed them the photos of the graves, the Morrison family, the fabric fragments, the skeletal remains. This is what happened to the last family who camped here exactly 37 years ago. They died of exposure. Their bodies were found 3 months ago, and you look exactly like them. You're wearing the same clothes. Your daughter has the same toy. This isn't coincidence. This is a pattern, and if you stay here, you'll die. The father's face went pale. The mother grabbed her daughter protectively. "You're scaring us. We're leaving." "Good. Pack up, now. I'll escort you out." They moved quickly, dismantling their camp with practiced efficiency. Within 15 minutes, they were ready to go. We hiked out in silence, the family staying close to me, glancing nervously at the dark forest around us. We reached my truck at 11:23 p.m. I loaded their gear, helped them into the vehicle, and started driving toward the park boundary. At 11:47 p.m., exactly as we crossed the boundary line, my radio crackled to life. "Please, someone help us. We're lost. My daughter, she's only 6. She can't walk anymore. Please, we need help now." The emergency call, playing again. But the family was safe. They were sitting right next to me in the truck. I grabbed my radio. "Dispatch, are you receiving an emergency call from Zone Alpha 7? "Negative read. All systems clear. No calls." But I could hear it, still broadcasting on my radio. The mother's voice, the daughter crying, the father shouting. Then, underneath it all, the whispered chorus. "Witness. Remember. Warn." I looked at the family in my rearview mirror. They were staring at the radio, hearing the same thing I was hearing. "That's my voice," the mother whispered. "But I didn't say that. I didn't." "I know. You didn't say it, but you would have if you'd stayed, if I hadn't found you, if the pattern had completed." The call faded as we put more distance between ourselves and the park boundary. By the time we reached the visitor center, it was gone completely.
It's been 3 months since I evacuated the Harrison family from Deep Hollow. In that time, I've learned several things. First, the audio equipment I left in the clearing has recorded nothing unusual since October 9th. The loop stopped. The time scream ended. Whatever mechanism was replaying that tragedy seems to have powered down once the family left safely. Second, the Harrison family exists. I tracked them down through persistent investigation. They live in Tennessee, not North Carolina. They'd never heard of wildernessexperiences.com. They'd booked their camping trip through a completely different service and had been given incorrect coordinates that led them into the restricted zone. They have no memory of seeing me before the night I evacuated them. No memory of the first encounter. The timeline where I found them safe and sound, where they claimed their phones had been dead for 2 days, where we spoke in the clearing at 1:23 a.m. That timeline only exists in my memory and my personal recordings. Third, I've been added to a database I didn't know existed, a network of rangers, first responders, and park personnel who've experienced temporal anomalies in protected wilderness areas. There are 47 of us now. Witnesses to time screams, loop events, collapsed causality incidents. We don't talk about it officially, can't put it in formal reports, but we share information, compare experiences, try to identify high-risk zones where time doesn't work properly. Deep Hollow is now marked in our private database as a Class 3 temporal anomaly zone, high risk for causality collapse. Avoid during October. Monitor for family groups matching historical disappearance profiles. Fourth, the Morrison graves have been properly excavated and the remains given a formal burial. Their deaths are no longer mysteries. The case is closed. But I know the truth. They died in 1987 because no one heard their screams for help. Their deaths created a resonance in Deep Hollow, a time scream that echoed forward, trying to prevent the pattern from repeating. When the Harrison family camped in that clearing, the temporal barrier weakened, past and present and future overlapped. The Morrison deaths of 1987,
the Harrison family in 2024, and my future response to an emergency that would have happened if I hadn't intervened. All three timelines existed simultaneously until I broke the loop by evacuating the family. Now only one timeline remains, the one where they survived, the one where I heard the screams that weren't missing. Fifth, and most disturbing, I've listened to the emergency recording hundreds of times, analyzed every frequency, every word, every background sound, and I've realized something. The voice screaming for help, the voice I identified as mine through audio analysis, isn't quite right. It's close, very close, almost identical to my vocal patterns, but it's slightly older, rougher, like my voice will sound in 20 or 30 years. The recording wasn't from an emergency that might happen in the immediate future. It was from an emergency that will happen decades from now, when another family camps in Deep Hollow, when the pattern tries to restart, when I'm an old man, still a ranger, still responding to calls in these mountains, and when I find a family matching the Morrison description, it will be too late. I'll be screaming into my radio, begging for help, watching them die from exposure while rescue teams search in the wrong location. Unless I'm there first, unless I prevent them from camping there, unless I keep the loop broken.
I've made a commitment. Every October for the rest of my career, I'll patrol Deep Hollow. I'll monitor it. I'll intercept any family groups trying to camp in that clearing. I'll maintain the break in the pattern. Because I've heard my future self screaming for help, and I won't let that timeline become real. The mountains are full of time screams, echoes of tragedies past and future, recorded in places where the barrier between moments grows thin. Deep Hollow is just one of them. There are others. The Witness Network has documented 43 confirmed sites across the Appalachian Range where time collapses, where causality breaks down, where the cries of the dying echo across decades. We monitor them. We protect them. We try to prevent the patterns from completing. We are the witnesses, and we remember, and we warn, because in these mountains, time is not linear. The past reaches forward, the future reaches back, and in the spaces between, people scream for help that hasn't happened yet, or has already happened 37 years ago, or will happen 37 years from now. All at the same moment, all in the same place, all recorded in the time scream. I still work at the Blue Ridge Ranger Station. I still patrol Zone Alpha 7, though I mark Deep Hollow as restricted access in all my reports. And every October, at exactly 11:47 p.m. on the 26th, I sit in my truck at the northern access point and listen to my radio, waiting, in case the loop tries to restart, in case another family enters the clearing, in case I hear myself screaming from a future I'm trying to prevent. So far, the radio stays silent, but I know it's only a matter of time. The pattern wants to complete. The time scream wants to record itself. The tragedy wants to happen. And somewhere, in a timeline that hasn't crystallized yet, an older version of me is responding to an emergency in Deep Hollow, finding a family who camped in the wrong clearing, watching them die while I scream for help that won't arrive in time, recording myself into the loop, becoming the very call I responded to all those years ago, the snake eating its tail, the echo creating the sound, the witness witnessing himself. Unless I stop it, unless I keep the pattern broken, unless I stay vigilant. The cries that weren't missing, but will be 37 years from now, unless I'm there first.
I've driven Old Sawmill Fire Road 847 times in my career. I know every pothole, every curve, every mile marker between the Eastern Gate and the Overlook Tower. 13 miles of straight gravel cutting through some of the densest forest in the southern Appalachians, maintained for emergency access and logging operations that haven't been active since the 1970s. My name is James Harlow. I'm 52 years old, been a ranger with the Appalachian Forest Service for 27 years. I've seen black bears up close, pulled hikers out of ravines, fought wildfires that turned the sky orange for days. I thought I knew these mountains, every secret, every danger. I was wrong. It was October 17th, 3:14 a.m., when I started what should have been a routine night patrol. The forecast called for fog, normal for this time of year, nothing unusual. My truck was a 2019 Ford F-250, diesel engine, winch mounted on the front, light bar on the roof. Standard issue, reliable. I'd driven it through mud, snow, ice, never had a problem. I radioed dispatch before heading out. Station 4, this is Harlow, beginning patrol of Fire Road 47, estimated completion 4:30. Copy that, Harlow. Weather's getting thick out there. Drive safe. Always do. I pulled through the gate at the eastern entrance, locked it behind me per protocol, and started up the road. The headlights cut through the fog that hung in the trees like cotton, reducing visibility to maybe 50 yards. Not great, but I'd driven in worse. The road stretched ahead, perfectly straight, disappearing into the fog like a tunnel. On both sides, the forest pressed in close, pines and oaks forming solid walls of darkness beyond the reach of my headlights. I drove at 20 miles per hour, checking the shoulder for washouts or fallen trees. Everything looked normal, routine, boring even. At 3:23 a.m., I reached mile marker 4, halfway point. I stopped to log the checkpoint in my patrol book, a habit from the old days before digital systems. The engine idled smoothly. The radio played quiet country music. Everything was exactly as it should be. Then the temperature dropped. Not gradually, instantly. 1 second, it was 58 degrees according to the dash thermometer. The next second, it read 31. Frost began to form on the inside of the windshield, even though the heater was running full blast. I reached for the radio to report the anomaly, but before I could key the mic, the engine sputtered. Once, twice, then died completely. The headlights went out. The dashboard went dark. The radio cut to silence mid-song. Every electrical system in the truck failed simultaneously, leaving me sitting in absolute darkness in the middle of a fire road 13 miles from the nearest paved highway.
I tried the ignition. Nothing. Not even a click. The battery was completely dead, like someone had disconnected it while I wasn't looking. I sat there for maybe 30 seconds, my training kicking in, running through the possibilities. Electrical failure. Could be a short circuit. Could be the alternator. Could be a dozen different mechanical problems. But none of that explained the temperature drop. None of that explained the absolute silence that had fallen over the forest. I rolled down the window manually, the crank stiff from cold. The night air that came in was Arctic, wrong for October, wrong for the southern mountains. And it carried a smell I didn't recognize. Metallic, sharp, like ozone after a lightning strike, but stronger, more chemical. I grabbed my flashlight from the door pocket and flicked it on. Nothing. Dead. I tried my radio. Also dead. My phone showed no signal, and the battery was at 1%, even though I'd charged it fully before the shift. Every electronic device I had was dead or dying. And then I heard it. A sound like breathing. Deep, slow, rhythmic, coming from somewhere ahead on the road, obscured by the fog. I squinted into the darkness, trying to see what was making the sound.
The fog was thicker now, rolling across the road in waves, reducing visibility to maybe 20 feet. The breathing continued. In, out, each breath lasting 5 or 6 seconds, like something with massive lungs taking its time. Then I saw the eyes. They appeared in the fog at the far edge of my vision, maybe 100 yards down the road. 2 points of light, pale yellow-green, positioned about 5 feet off the ground. Too far apart to be a deer, too high to be a coyote, and they were looking directly at me. I've seen plenty of animals at night. Their eyes reflect light, catch it from headlights or flashlights and shine it back. But these weren't reflecting anything. My lights were dead. My flashlight was dead. There was no light source for them to reflect. These eyes were glowing, producing their own light, bioluminescent or something else I couldn't explain. The breathing sound intensified, faster now, still deep, still powerful, but with a rhythm that suggested excitement or anticipation. Whatever owned those eyes knew I was here, and it was interested. I reached for the door handle, thinking maybe I should get out, move away from the truck, find cover in the trees. But my hand froze on the handle as a terrible realization hit me. The eyes were getting closer. I hadn't heard footsteps, hadn't heard movement, but the eyes were definitely closer now, maybe 70 yards, still at the same height, still locked on me. Whatever it was approaching, and it was doing so in complete silence. I watched, paralyzed by a fear I couldn't rationalize, as the eyes continued to close the distance. 60 yards, 50 yards. The fog swirled around them, backlit by their glow, creating patterns that hurt to look at. At 40 yards, I started to see the shape. It was massive, quadrupedal, built low to the ground like a bear, but much larger. The body was wrong, though. Too long, too many joints in the legs. The proportions didn't match any animal I knew. 30 yards. The breathing was loud enough now that I could feel it. Deep bass notes that made my truck vibrate, that made my chest ache with each inhalation. 20 yards. I could see details now. Dark fur or skin, matted and wet-looking. The head was enormous, wider than a grizzly's, with those glowing eyes set deep in the skull. And the mouth, God, the mouth. It hung slightly open, revealing teeth that caught the eye glow and glittered like white stone. 15 yards. It wasn't running, wasn't charging, just walking, a steady, patient approach that somehow covered ground faster than should be possible. Each step it took should have moved it forward by maybe 3 feet, but it crossed 5 feet, 6 feet. The distance between us collapsed in ways that violated basic geometry. 10 yards. I could see its breath now, clouds of vapor that glowed faintly green in the air before dissipating. The temperature had even dropped further. Ice was forming on my truck's hood, crystallizing in fractal patterns that looked almost deliberate. 5 yards. It stopped. We were separated by less than 15 feet. The creature stood at the edge of my headlight range, though the lights were dead, as if respecting some invisible boundary. Its eyes never left mine, didn't blink, didn't waver. Up close, I could see it wasn't quite real. The edges were wrong, blurred, like looking at something through water or heat shimmer. Its form kept shifting slightly, never quite settling into a fixed shape. One moment it looked like a massive wolf, the next something reptilian, then something else entirely, something with too many limbs and joints that bent the wrong way. It opened its mouth wider, not threatening, not aggressive, just opening, revealing a throat that went down and down and down, impossibly deep, glowing with that same yellow-green light. And then it spoke. Not in words, not in any language, but I heard it in my head, a voice that wasn't sound, but pure meaning, downloaded directly into my brain.
That's all it said. One word, one concept,
but packed into that single word was a weight of intention that nearly crushed me. This thing wanted me to see it, to acknowledge it, to carry the knowledge of its existence forward. I tried to look away. Couldn't. Its eyes held mine with a force that felt physical, like hooks in my skull pulling my gaze forward. Witness what comes before. Before what? Before humanity? Before civilization? Before the mountains themselves? I don't know how long we stayed like that. Seconds, minutes. Time felt broken, stretched and compressed simultaneously. My watch had stopped at 3:23, frozen at the exact moment the truck died. Then, with a movement too fast to follow, the creature reached out. I saw the limb extend. Not a paw, not quite a claw, something in between or outside those categories entirely. It had too many fingers, each one ending in something that looked like obsidian, black and sharp and gleaming. The limb came down on the hood of my truck. The sound was incredible. Metal screaming, steel tearing like paper. The entire truck rocked backward from the impact, suspension groaning, tires skidding on gravel despite the parking brake being engaged. When the limb withdrew, it left marks. 5 deep gouges cut completely through the hood, through the metal and the engine block beneath, down to the frame. The cuts were perfectly parallel, each one exactly 2 inches wide and impossibly smooth, like they'd been carved by industrial equipment rather than organic material. And they glowed. Faint yellow-green light emanated from the gouges, the same color as the creature's eyes, pulsing slowly like a heartbeat. The creature lowered its head, bringing those eyes level with mine through the windshield. We were face to face now, separated only by a sheet of glass that suddenly seemed very thin and very fragile. Witness what comes walks the old roads. Then it exhaled. The breath came through the hood vents, through gaps in the door seals, through every tiny opening in the truck's cabin. That metallic smell intensified, became overwhelming, made my eyes water and my throat burn. And in that breath, I saw things. Visions, memories, not mine, the creatures, or maybe the mountains. Images flashing through my mind faster than thought. The forest before humans, before trees, when the mountains were young and sharp and the air was poison. Creatures moving through that ancient landscape, things that had no names because there was no one to name them, things that predated categorization, things that simply were. And this creature, or things like it, walking the paths that would one day become fire roads and highways and trails, marking territory, claiming space, existing in the gaps between what evolution would eventually produce. Most of them died out or changed or adapted into forms we now recognize. Bears, wolves, mountain lions, echoes of their earlier, stranger selves. But some remained. Some held to their original forms, retreating into deep places, emerging only occasionally to remind the world that they were here first and would be here last. This was one of them, a thing from before, a remnant, a witness to ages we can't comprehend and shouldn't try to. The visions stopped as suddenly as they'd started. I was back in my truck, gasping, my nose bleeding, my head pounding like someone had driven a spike through my skull. The creature was still there, still watching, still waiting. Then, with that same impossible speed, it turned and walked away. Not running, not fleeing, just leaving, moving back the road the way it had come, covering distance that should have taken minutes in what felt like seconds. The fog closed around it like a curtain, swallowing it whole, leaving only the faint glow of its eyes visible for a moment longer. Then even that was gone.
I sat in the truck, shaking, bleeding, trying to understand what had just happened. The temperature was rising, slowly, degree by degree, returning to normal October levels. The frost on the windshield began to melt. I tried the ignition again. Nothing. The truck was still completely dead, all systems offline, the dashboard dark and silent. I checked my watch, still stopped at 3:23. My phone was at 0%, completely drained, the screen black and unresponsive. The only light came from the gouges in the hood. They still glowed, faint but persistent, casting weird shadows inside the cabin. I needed to signal for help. I was 13 miles from the nearest gate, 6.5 miles from the overlook tower where I knew there was emergency radio equipment. Walking in the dark through fog on a mountain road with something like that out there was suicide. But I couldn't stay in the truck forever. I reached into the back seat and grabbed my emergency kit. Inside was a flare gun, 6 flares, a hand crank radio, and various first aid supplies. I loaded the flare gun, cranked the radio until the battery indicator showed a charge, and tried to establish contact. Static. Just static. But the radio was working, which meant the electromagnetic interference, or whatever had killed my truck's systems, was fading. I fired a flare straight up. It arced into the sky, burning bright red against the fog, visible for miles in every direction. Standard distress signal. Anyone watching would know a ranger was in trouble. I waited, cranked the radio again, tried different frequencies. At 3:47 a.m., I got a response. "This is Station 4. We see your flare. What's your situation, Harlow?" I keyed the mic, my hand shaking so badly I could barely hold it. "Truck's dead, all systems. I'm at mile marker 4 on Fire Road 47. I need immediate extraction." "Copy that. What happened? Mechanical failure?" I looked at the glowing gouges in my hood, at the patterns they made, at the way they seemed to pulse in rhythm with my heartbeat. "Unknown," I said. "Just get me out of here." "Dispatch is sending Ranger Collins from the western gate. ETA 20 minutes. Sit tight, Harlow. You injured?" "Negative. Just shaken up." "Understood. Stay on this frequency. We'll maintain contact." I sat there in the dark, listening to the forest slowly come back to life. The absolute silence that had fallen when the creature appeared was lifting. I could hear wind in the trees now, distant animal sounds, the normal night chorus of the Appalachians. But I kept the flare gun loaded, kept watching the road ahead, the fog, the spaces between the trees. 20 minutes felt like 20 hours. Ranger Tom Collins arrived at 4:09 a.m. in his truck, headlights cutting through the thinning fog. He pulled up alongside me and got out, flashlight in hand, concern written across his face. "Harlow, you okay?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. He approached my truck, saw the hood, and stopped dead. Jesus Christ, what did that? I don't know. He played his flashlight over the gouges. They were still glowing, though fainter now, barely visible in the beam. These cuts go all the way through the hood, through the engine. What could do this? I said, "I don't know." Tom looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw the concern deepen. "Your nose is bleeding, and your eyes. Jim, your eyes are bloodshot to hell. What happened out here?" "Something hit my truck, killed the electrical system. I signaled for help. That's all I can tell you." It wasn't all I could tell him, but it was all I was going to tell him, because if I told him the truth, told him about the creature and the visions and the voice in my head, he'd call for a medical evac, and I'd spend the next week in psychiatric evaluation. And I couldn't do that. I couldn't be taken off duty, because if I was, they'd send someone else to patrol this road, someone who didn't know what was out here, someone who might not survive the next encounter. Tom helped me into his truck. We hooked up a tow chain to my vehicle and pulled it back down the road toward the eastern gate. My truck rolled easily enough, but even with Tom's engine running, the lights stayed dead,
the dashboard dark. As we drove, I kept watching the road ahead, the fog, the trees, looking for those eyes, that shape, that presence. But the road was empty, normal, just another fire road in the Appalachian Mountains, exactly like 1,000 others. We reached the gate at 4:42 a.m. Station 4 had sent a recovery team with a flatbed. They loaded my truck and hauled it to the maintenance facility for evaluation. The head mechanic called me 3 days later. "Harlow, this is Davis at the garage. I need to talk to you about your truck." "What about it?" "We can't fix it." "What do you mean you can't fix it?" "I mean, the damage is unlike anything I've ever seen. Those gouges in the hood, they didn't just cut through the metal. They fused it somehow, changed the molecular structure. The steel around the cuts is brittle, crystallized, like it was exposed to extreme temperatures and then frozen solid in seconds. And the engine. Christ, the engine. Every component is seized, completely locked up. Nothing will turn. We'd have to replace the entire block, and even then, I'm not sure the truck would run. There's something wrong with it on a fundamental level." "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying we're totaling it, writing it off as a complete loss. And Jim, between you and me, I'm recommending it be destroyed rather than salvaged. I don't want parts from this thing going into other vehicles. Whatever happened to it, it's like the truck itself is contaminated." I thanked him and hung up. Then I pulled out my patrol log and made an entry. October 17th, 2024, 3:23 a.m., mile marker 4, Fire Road 47. Encountered unknown wildlife. Extreme caution advised for future patrols. Recommend avoiding this route during night hours until further notice. I submitted the report. My supervisor read it, asked a few questions I answered vaguely, then filed it away. The road was temporarily closed for maintenance evaluation. That was 6 months ago.
Fire Road 47 has been reopened. They installed new signage, repaired some washouts, declared it safe for ranger patrols. The official report said my truck suffered a catastrophic electrical failure, possibly due to a lightning strike that I didn't remember because of minor head trauma from the incident. They gave me a new truck, 2024 model, same specs, same equipment, everything identical to the one I lost. Except I can't drive it on Fire Road 47. I've tried. 3 times now I've pulled up to the eastern gate, unlocked it, sat there with my hand on the gear shift ready to proceed with the patrol. And I can't do it. My body won't let me. The moment I think about driving that road, about going past mile marker 4, about being in that place where the creature appeared, my hands start shaking, my vision blurs, my heart rate spikes to dangerous levels. It's not fear, not exactly. It's something deeper, more primal. My body remembers what my mind experienced and refuses to repeat the exposure. So I don't patrol Fire Road 47 anymore. I've requested permanent reassignment to other sectors, and my supervisor approved it without comment. Another ranger handles that route now. Younger guy, confident, talks about how peaceful it is up there, how he's never seen any wildlife more dangerous than a black bear. He hasn't worked a night shift there yet. I haven't warned him. What would I say? That something lives on that road? Something before? Something that defies explanation? That the mountains are older than we know and remember things we've forgotten? He'd think I was crazy. Hell, most days I think I'm crazy. But then I remember the visions, the voice, the weight of that single word pressed into my consciousness. Witness. That's what it wanted. Not to hurt me, not to kill me, just to be seen, to be acknowledged, to remind one human being that we're not alone in these mountains, that we never have been, that there are things here that predate our understanding and will outlast our civilization. I was chosen for that witnessing. Or maybe I was just unlucky enough to be in the right place at the right time. Either way, I carry the knowledge now.
the burden of knowing what walks the old roads when humans aren't watching. And sometimes, late at night when I'm driving other routes in the park, I see things in my peripheral vision, shapes that don't quite match known animals, eyes that glow with their own light, movement that covers distance faster than physics should allow. I don't turn to look. I don't investigate. I just keep driving, maintain my patrol route, and pretend I didn't see anything. Because I understand now, there are things in these mountains that humans aren't meant to confront directly, things that exist in the spaces between our knowledge and our fear, things that only reveal themselves to witnesses. And once you've been chosen as a witness, once you've seen what walks the old roads, you can never unsee it.
I thought I could avoid Fire Road 47 forever. Transfer to different sectors, work different shifts, build a career around that one blind spot in my patrol territory. I was wrong. On March 3rd, 6 months after the incident, I got a call at 2:47 a.m. Dispatch, emergency tone. Harlow, we need you to respond to Fire Road 47. Ranger Mitchell hasn't checked in from his patrol. Last known position was mile marker 4. We're getting no response on radio. Mitchell, the young ranger who'd taken over my route, confident, experienced, completely unprepared for what he might encounter. I can't drive that road. Jim, a ranger is missing. You're the senior officer on duty. This isn't a request. She was right. I knew she was right. My personal trauma didn't matter when someone's life was on the line. I'll go, I said, but I'm bringing backup. Tell Station 7 to send someone to meet me at the western gate. Copy that. Harlow, be careful. I drove to the park in my personal vehicle, transferred to my ranger truck, and headed for Fire Road 47's western gate. The backup from Station 7 was already there when I arrived. Ranger Sarah Chen, mid-30s, solid reputation. "What's the situation?" she asked as I unlocked the gate. Mitchell missed his check-in. Last known position was mile marker 4. That's where you had your incident. Everyone knew about my incident. Not the details, but the fact that something had happened, that my truck had been destroyed, that I'd requested reassignment. Yeah, that's where it happened. What should I watch for? I didn't answer, just got in my truck and started up the road, Chen following in hers. The fog was back, thick and heavy, reducing visibility to almost nothing, just like that night. We drove slowly, our headlights barely penetrating the murk. Mile marker 1, mile marker 2, mile marker 3. At mile marker 4, we found Mitchell's truck. It was parked in the middle of the road, exactly where mine had been. Engine off, lights dead, all systems dark. And the hood had 5 deep gouges carved through it, glowing faint yellow-green in the darkness. "Stay in your vehicle," I radioed to Chen. "Do not get out. Do not approach his truck." "I see him. He's in the cab, not moving." I could see him too. Mitchell slumped in the driver's seat, his head tilted back, his eyes open and staring at nothing. I grabbed my flashlight, my flare gun, and stepped out of my truck. The temperature dropped immediately. The same Arctic cold, the same metallic smell. "Harlow, what's happening?" Chen's voice over the radio. "My electronics just died. Everything's offline." "Stay in your truck," I repeated, "and whatever you see, don't try to interact with it." I approached Mitchell's vehicle, my flashlight beam cutting through the fog. The closer I got, the more I could see. The frost on his windows, the ice crystals forming on his skin, the complete stillness of his body. I opened the door. Mitchell fell against me, rigid, frozen solid like he'd been sitting in a deep freeze for hours instead of minutes. But he was breathing,
Shallow, slow, but breathing. Mitchell, can you hear me?
His eyes moved, slowly, tracking toward my face. His lips tried to form words but couldn't. His entire body was hypothermic, shut down to near-death levels. Then I heard it, that deep, rhythmic breathing coming from the fog ahead. I turned, and there it was. The creature, exactly as I remembered. Massive, quadrupedal, eyes glowing with that yellow-green light, standing maybe 30 yards down the road, watching, waiting. Witness again. The voice in my head. Not angry, not threatening, just stating fact. I already witnessed, I said aloud. I already saw you. I already carry your message. Not for you, for her. I understood then. The creature hadn't come for me. It had come for Chen, for the next witness, for the next person who needed to understand what walked these mountains. She doesn't need to see this. Let her stay in her truck. Let her leave with her eyes closed. Not her choice, not yours. The mountain chooses. I looked back at Chen's truck. She was still inside, her face pressed against the window, staring at the creature with an expression I recognized, the same terror and awe I'd felt, the same inability to look away. The creature began to approach, that same impossible speed, covering ground faster than it should, defying the physics of motion and distance. I had seconds to decide. Let it happen. Let Chen experience what I'd experienced. Let her carry the burden of witnessing, or try to stop it. I raised the flare gun and fired directly at the creature. The flare hit its center mass, burning bright red, impossibly bright in the fog. The creature stopped, not recoiling, not in pain, just stopping, its attention shifting from Chen to me. Interference. Yeah, interference. You already have your witness. You don't need another one. The mountain needs many witnesses, many voices, many who remember. Then show yourself in daylight. Make yourself known. Stop hiding in fog and darkness and fear. We do not hide. We wait for those strong enough to see, for those willing to carry truth forward. What truth? That things like you exist? That the mountains have secrets? People won't believe us. They'll think we're crazy. Belief is not required. Knowledge is enough. You carry it now. She will carry it. Others will follow. Eventually, enough will know. Enough will remember. Enough will witness. And then what? Then the gate opens. Then what was before returns. Then the mountains remember fully. I didn't know what that meant, didn't want to know, but I understood the stakes now. Every person who witnessed the creature became part of a countdown. 44 out of 77, 33 to go. What if I refuse? What if I tell Chen to close her eyes, turn around, never come back here? You cannot refuse what has already begun. She has seen, she has heard, she is witness now. I looked back at Chen. She was out of her truck now, standing in the road, her face illuminated by the creature's glow, transfixed, transformed, already being shown the visions, the memories, the truth of what walked before. I'd failed to protect her, failed to stop the witnessing. The creature turned its attention back to her, approaching slowly now, respectfully, like a priest performing a sacred rite. It reached out with that impossible limb and touched her truck's hood, leaving the same 5 parallel gouges, the same glowing marks. The mark of the witness. Then it withdrew, backing into the fog, eyes still locked on us both. 44 now, 33 more. The gate approaches. And it was gone. We got Mitchell to a hospital. He survived, but never returned to ranger duty.
Extreme hypothermia, they said. Exposure. He was lucky to be alive. He doesn't talk about what he saw. Doesn't have to. I can see it in his eyes. He's a witness too. 45. Chen transferred to my sector. We don't talk about Fire Road 47, but we don't have to. We recognize each other now. Recognize the weight we carry, the knowledge we can't share, the countdown we're part of. Sometimes I check the incident reports from other national forests, looking for familiar patterns. Trucks with electrical failures, rangers reporting unusual wildlife encounters, mysterious gouges left in metal. I find them. Not often, but regularly enough to see the pattern. Every few months, somewhere in the Appalachian Range, another witness is created. 46, 47, 48. The count continues. I still work as a ranger, still patrol the mountains I love, but I patrol differently now. I watch for the signs, the fog, the temperature drops, the moment when electronics fail and the old world pushes through. And I wait. We all wait. Those of us who've seen, those of us who carry the marks, visible or otherwise. Waiting for witness 77.
The call came in on a Tuesday morning in November. Cold, clear. The kind of Appalachian autumn day where the mountains look like a painting, all rust and gold and deep green, and you'd never suspect that anything could go wrong out there. My name is Daniel Crow. 14 years with the North Carolina Forestry and Wildlife Division. Senior Ranger, Search and Rescue Certified. Wilderness First Responder. I've recovered bodies pulled from ravines, hikers who froze to death, and I check on him every morning because he doesn't always remember to eat. When did you last see him, ma'am? Yesterday afternoon, around 2 p.m. He was sitting on his porch like always, staring at the tree line. Same thing he does every day, just sitting there. But when I came back this morning, his front door was open, lights on, coffee still in the pot, cold. Has he left the property before without telling you? A pause. Mr. Crow, Earl Dawson hasn't left his property in 6 years. He has agoraphobia, severe. He hasn't walked those woods in over a decade. Something isn't right. I took down the details, coordinates, and description. Earl Dawson, 78 years old, white, thin, gray hair. Last seen wearing flannel shirt and work pants, no jacket, no hat. History of paranoid delusions and severe anxiety disorder. Lived alone in a cabin at the edge of Blackwood Creek. Ms. Marsh, has he expressed any thoughts of self-harm? Another pause, this time longer. Not that I know of. But he's been saying strange things lately, talking about the silence, about how the forest went quiet. I thought he was just being Earl. You know how old folks get. What exactly did he say about the silence? He said the forest stopped talking to him, that something had taken its voice. He seemed frightened, but not the usual frightened,
Not the kind where you tell him it's okay and he calms down. This was different. This was like he'd seen something he couldn't explain and didn't want to think about anymore.
I wrote it all down, thanked Miss Marsh, and radioed for backup. Standard missing persons protocol for a vulnerable elderly man in a rural area. Get eyes on the terrain, check trails, contact neighboring properties, set up a search grid. But when I drove out to the Dawson property that afternoon, something told me to come alone. Call it instinct, call it experience. Call it the way Miss Marsh's voice had changed when she talked about the silence, like she was afraid of the word itself. I parked my truck at the end of the dirt road and walked the last quarter-mile to the cabin. The property was modest. Small house, old truck up on blocks, a vegetable garden gone to seed for the winter, a woodpile stacked neat and high against the side of the cabin, the kind of place a man lived alone and kept to himself, and asked nothing of the world except to be left in peace. The front door was open, just as Miss Marsh had described. I knocked on the frame and called out. No answer. I stepped inside. The cabin was clean, sparse. A single room with a wood stove, a cot, a table, a shelf of books worn soft from repeated reading. The coffee pot was on the stove, cold, half full. A mug sat on the table, untouched. On the table, next to the mug, was a piece of paper, a hand-drawn map, crude but detailed, showing the tree line behind the cabin, trails and creek beds marked with careful precision, and a single straight line drawn from the cabin door directly into the woods. At the end of the line, 2 words written in shaky handwriting: "Don't follow." I studied the map for a long time. Then I pocketed it and walked outside. I found it the moment I stepped around the back of the cabin. It was impossible to miss. A perfectly straight line cut through the forest, starting at the edge of Earl Dawson's yard and extending into the trees as far as I could see. Not a trail, not a path cleared by man or animal. The vegetation on either side of the line was untouched, thick and healthy and normal. But the line itself was dead. A strip maybe 3 feet wide, running through the forest floor like a surgical incision. Within it, every leaf was brown and brittle. Every blade of grass was curled and gray. Every insect was gone. No spiders, no beetles, no ants. The soil was hard and pale, drained of moisture and color, like something had sucked the life out of it in a perfect geometric strip. And it was silent. Not quiet, silent. There is a difference between the two that most people never notice because they've never experienced true silence. In the woods, even on the calmest day, there is sound. Wind, birds, insects, the creak of branches, the rustle of leaves settling, the constant background orchestra of a living ecosystem. The sound stopped at the edge of the line, dropped off like hitting a wall. One step inside the strip, and the world went mute. No birds, no wind, no rustling, nothing but the sound of my own breathing and the blood moving through my ears. I stood at the boundary, 1 foot on grass, 1 foot on the dead strip, and tested it. Clapped my hands together outside the line. Sharp, clear sound. Moved my hands inside the line and clapped again. Nothing. My palms hit each other and I felt the impact, but heard nothing. Complete audio void. I pulled out my radio and keyed the mic while standing inside the strip. "Station 4, this is Crow. Do you copy?" Silence. The transmission indicator showed the radio was functioning, signal strength normal, but no sound came through. I stepped back outside the line and tried again. "Station 4, this is Crow. Do you copy?" "Copy that, Crow. Go ahead." The radio worked perfectly outside the line, died the instant I crossed into the silent strip. I documented everything. Photographs from every angle, video, GPS coordinates marking the start of the line and its trajectory into the forest.
I marked the boundary with flagging tape so I could find it again. Then I went back to the cabin and looked at Earl Dawson's map again. The line on his drawing matched exactly what I was seeing. He'd mapped it precisely with careful measurements and directional markers. He'd been studying this phenomenon, tracking it, understanding it, and he'd written, "Don't follow" at the end of it. Then he followed it anyway. I radioed dispatch and reported my findings. "I've located what appears to be the path Mr. Dawson took into the forest. I'm going to follow it and attempt to locate him." "Copy that, Crow. Backup is 30 minutes out. Do you want to wait?" I looked at the silent line stretching into the trees, at the dead vegetation, at the absolute unnatural quiet that hung over it like a funeral shroud. "Negative. I'm going in now. If I don't check in within 2 hours, send everything you've got." "Understood. Be careful." I grabbed my pack, checked my equipment, and stepped back onto the silent strip. The world went mute.
Walking inside the silence was wrong in ways I couldn't immediately articulate. The first thing I noticed was how loud my own body became. Without external sound to mask it, every internal noise was amplified. My heartbeat, my breathing, the blood rushing through my ears, the creak of my joints, the shift of clothing against skin. It was like being trapped inside a drum that played my own biology back at me. The second thing was the disorientation. Sound gives us spatial awareness without us realizing it. We orient ourselves using echoes, reflections, the way noise bounces off surfaces. In total silence, that orientation disappears. The trees on either side of the line became just shapes, flat and meaningless, stripped of the depth that sound provides. I walked for 20 minutes before I realized I was losing time. Not falling asleep exactly, more like drifting. My thoughts would start to coil inward, spiraling into a warm darkness that felt peaceful and safe. I'd catch myself staring at the ground, watching my feet move, completely disconnected from where I was or what I was doing. The silence was pulling me under. I stopped walking and forced myself to focus. Stomped my boot against the ground, felt the vibration travel up my leg, but heard nothing. Shouted at the top of my lungs, felt my throat burn with the effort, but received no auditory feedback whatsoever. The absence of sound was suffocating, literally. I found myself breathing faster, shallower, as if my body was trying to compensate for something it couldn't identify. My chest felt tight. My head was beginning to ache, a slow, building pressure behind my eyes that intensified with every step I took deeper into the forest. I checked my GPS. I'd walked 400 meters along the line. It continued straight ahead, unwavering, cutting through trees and undergrowth without deviation. Whatever had created this path hadn't encountered any obstacles, hadn't bent around boulders or followed terrain. It had simply gone straight, as if reality itself had been sliced open in a direct line. At 500 meters, I found the first sign of Earl Dawson, his flannel shirt. It was lying on the ground at the edge of the silent strip, folded neatly, not discarded, placed there with care, like he'd taken it off deliberately and set it down before continuing. Next to it were his shoes, his socks, folded, organized, a man undressing with purpose, not panic. I continued walking. The headache was getting worse now, a sharp, throbbing pain that made my vision blur at the edges. I stopped every 100 meters to check my compass, make sure I was still moving in the right direction, still following the line. My thoughts kept trying to drift, kept pulling me toward that warm, dark place where nothing mattered and everything was quiet and peaceful. At 700 meters, the trees changed. The forest here was ancient, old-growth Douglas firs and tulip poplars that had been standing for centuries. The canopy was so dense overhead that almost no light penetrated to the forest floor.
It should have been dark and oppressive, but it wasn't. There was a faint luminescence here, a pale blue-gray light that seemed to emanate from the air itself, from the silence itself, as if the void had a physical presence that glowed. The dead strip was wider here, 5 feet, 10 feet. The edges of the silent zone were spreading, creeping outward with each passing step, and the headache was unbearable now. I stopped and pressed my palms against my temples, trying to breathe through the pain. My vision swam. The edges of my sight were going dark, not from shadow, but from something else, some kind of pressure that was squeezing the life out of my senses one by one. I could still hear my heartbeat, still hear my breathing, but even those sounds were getting quieter, muffled, as if the silence was consuming them too, consuming my ability to generate or perceive sound at all. For a moment, just a moment, I felt what Earl Dawson must have felt, the seduction of it, the release, the absolute peace of existing in a place where nothing could reach you, where the world and all its noise and demands and constant assault on your senses simply stopped. It was beautiful, and that was exactly why it was dangerous. I pulled myself back from the edge, forced my breathing to steady, and kept walking. 800 meters, 900, 1,000. The light was brighter now, the silence was deeper, and ahead of me, at the end of the line, I could see a shape. A man sitting at the base of a tree, perfectly still.
I approached him slowly, my headache screaming, my vision tunneling, every step requiring conscious effort to maintain. Earl Dawson was sitting with his back against an ancient oak, his legs stretched out in front of him, his hands resting on his lap. His eyes were closed. His expression was peaceful, serene, the kind of peace you see on the faces of people who finally, after a lifetime of struggle, have found rest. He was breathing, shallow and slow, but breathing. I knelt in front of him and touched his shoulder. "Mr. Dawson, Earl, can you hear me?" Nothing. No response. No flicker of eyelids, no change in breathing. He was alive, but completely unreachable, like someone in the deepest possible sleep, so far below consciousness that no external stimulus could pull him back. I checked his pulse, slow but steady, checked his pupils by lifting one eyelid, responsive to light but barely. His skin was cold, not hypothermic, but cold in a way that suggested he'd been sitting here for a very long time without generating heat. I tried my radio. Dead. Of course it was dead. We were deep inside the void. Then I heard it. Not with my ears, in my head, behind my eyes. A presence, vast and patient and ancient, like a consciousness the size of the mountain itself, turning its attention toward me. It didn't speak, didn't communicate in words or thoughts or images. It simply made itself known, made me aware of its existence the way you become aware of something enormous in the dark. Not by seeing it, by feeling the space it occupied, by understanding how much of the world it displaced. The void was alive. Not alive the way animals or plants or people are alive. Alive the way hunger is alive, the way need is alive. It was a living absence, a sentient emptiness that fed on sound the way a fire feeds on oxygen. It consumed noise and vibration and acoustic energy, drawing it in and breaking it down, converting the world's sound into sustenance. And it had been doing this for a very, very long time.
I understood, in that moment of contact with the entity's awareness, what had happened to Earl Dawson. The void had found him, had recognized something in him, some quality that made him useful. Not a victim, an anchor. a fixed point around which the void could expand, a living connection to the physical world that allowed it to maintain its presence in a place where it shouldn't be able to exist. Earl's agoraphobia, his anxiety, his decades of isolation and fear, those weren't just mental illness, they were symptoms. The void had been influencing him for years, feeding on the sounds of his world, gradually widening its reach, using his consciousness as a bridge between its nature and physical reality. The path of silence wasn't a trail he'd walked. It was the void's feeding tube, a corridor of consumed sound that extended from the anchor, Earl himself, outward into the forest, growing longer every day, consuming more sound with every passing hour, and Earl had finally walked the full length of it, had followed the silence to its source, had sat down at the center of the void, and surrendered to the peace it offered. The peace of being completely, utterly silent, forever. The void pulsed, a slow, rhythmic expansion and contraction that I felt in my chest, in my bones, in the spaces between my thoughts. It was content. Earl was a perfect anchor, quiet, compliant, peaceful, and it was hungry for more. I felt its attention shift toward me, not threatening, evaluating, considering, the way a predator considers whether something is worth the effort of pursuit. I needed to move, needed to break whatever connection was forming between my consciousness and the void's awareness, but my body felt heavy, leaden, as if gravity had doubled while I was kneeling in front of Earl. That was the void's design. It consumed silence, but silence was just the beginning. Vibration was next, movement, thought, consciousness itself. Given enough time, given enough proximity, it would consume everything, leave nothing but silence and stillness, an empty space where a living person used to be. I needed noise.
I'd brought a chainsaw. Not for this. I'd grabbed it from my truck out of habit, standard equipment for any backcountry search where fallen trees might block your path. A Stihl MS-391, gas-powered, 20-inch bar, heavy, loud, exactly what I needed. I fumbled with the carrying case, my hands shaking, my vision blurring, the pressure in my skull building with every passing second. The pull of the void was getting stronger, the warm darkness creeping back into my thoughts, whispering that it was okay to stop fighting, okay to rest, okay to be quiet. I pulled the chainsaw free and set it on the ground in front of me, checked the fuel, half tank, enough. Then I stopped, because something occurred to me, something that cut through the fog in my mind with sudden, terrible clarity. If the void fed on sound, and I created a massive amount of sound right here at its center, right at the point of maximum density, what would happen? Two possibilities. Either the sound would damage it, disrupt it, force it to retreat or collapse, the way a sudden bright light damages eyes that have been in darkness. Or the sound would feed it, give it exactly what it wanted, strengthen it, let it expand further, faster, consuming more of the forest, more of the world. I looked at Earl Dawson, peaceful and silent and anchored to the void, looked at the pale blue-gray light emanating from the silence itself, felt the void's attention pressing against my mind like water against a dam. I thought about the path of dead vegetation stretching back through the forest, about the insects that had vanished, the birds that no longer sang, about Helen Marsh describing the way Earl had talked about the silence taking the forest's voice. It was growing, had been growing for years, maybe decades, slowly expanding outward from Earl's property, consuming more and more of the acoustic ecosystem of these mountains. If I left now, If I managed to drag myself back down the path of silence and report what I'd found, what would happen? They'd send a team, scientists maybe the military. They'd study it, try to understand it, probably set up monitoring equipment and observation posts and spend years debating what it was and what to do about it. And while they debated, the void would keep growing, keep consuming, keep expanding the silence outward into the forest until there was nothing left to hear. The mountains needed their voice back. I gripped the chainsaw's pull cord. "All right," I said, though I heard nothing. "Let's see what you're made of." I yanked the cord. The engine caught on the third pole, roaring to life with a sound that was, in that moment, the most violent thing I'd ever experienced. Not because it was loud to me. I couldn't hear it. The void swallowed the sound the instant it was produced. But I could feel it, through the vibration in my hands, through the chain cutting air, through the raw mechanical fury of an engine producing sustained, aggressive noise at the exact center of a sentient silence. The void reacted. The blue-gray light flickered. The pressure in my skull spiked, then dropped, then spiked again. The air around me seemed to ripple, like heat distortion, like the void itself was shuddering.
I held the chainsaw at full throttle and felt it shake in my hands with an intensity that told me the engine was working harder than it had ever worked, cutting through something that wasn't wood or air, but resistance. Pure, concentrated resistance from an entity that didn't want to be disrupted. For 10 seconds, nothing else happened. The void pulsed, shuddered. The light flickered in and out. Then Earl Dawson's eyes snapped open. They were wrong, completely wrong. No iris, no pupil, just flat, reflective surfaces, like mirrors, like glass. The void looking out through his face. His mouth opened. No sound came out, of course, but I could see the shape of words forming on his lips. Stop. I didn't stop. I revved the chainsaw higher, pressing the throttle to maximum, letting the engine scream at its full mechanical capacity. The vibration traveled up my arms, into my chest, rattled my teeth. My vision was going white at the edges, blood pressure spiking from the effort of maintaining consciousness in the heart of the void. Earl's body began to convulse. Not a seizure, something else. Something being pulled out of him or something being torn away from him, like a parasite being ripped from its host. The blue-gray light intensified, then flared white, then began to contract, pulling inward, shrinking. The dead strip of vegetation at the edge of the void began to ripple, and where it rippled, color returned. Brown gave way to green. Gray gave way to gold. Life bleeding back into the dead earth like water filling a crack in stone. The silence was breaking. I kept the chainsaw running, kept it roaring, kept it vibrating, kept it producing sustained, aggressive noise at the very center of the void's existence. And the void began to scream back, not in sound, in sensation. A pulse of pure, concentrated absence that hit me like a physical blow, knocking me backward, sending me sprawling across the forest floor. The chainsaw fell from my hands, still running, still roaring, its engine cutting into the leaf litter, spraying debris in all directions. I lay on my back, gasping, staring up at the canopy, and watched the void collapse. It happened fast. The pale light contracted to a point, a single spot of blue-gray luminescence directly above Earl Dawson's head. Then it compressed further, smaller and smaller, like a star collapsing in on itself. And then it was gone. Sound hit me like a wall. Every bird in the forest calling at once. Wind through 1,000 trees simultaneously, insects erupting into chorus after what must have been months or years of enforced silence. Rain beginning to fall, though I hadn't noticed clouds forming. Individual drops striking leaves and ground and my own upturned face. The volume was staggering, overwhelming. After walking in absolute silence for over a kilometer, the sudden return of the world's acoustic presence was like being plunged into the center of a hurricane. I covered my ears and squeezed my eyes shut, waiting for my nervous system to adjust, waiting for the sensory overload to subside. It took a full minute. When I opened my eyes, the forest was alive again, vibrant, full of color and movement and sound. Birds circled overhead, returning to trees they must have abandoned when the silence first spread here. Insects crawled across leaves that were turning from brown back to green, photosynthesis resuming like a machine being restarted. The dead strip was gone. The vegetation was recovering in real time, shoots of new growth pushing up through the soil with a speed that shouldn't have been possible in November. The line of silence was healing itself, filling in the wound the void had left, and doing it fast. Within minutes, there would be no trace that anything had ever been wrong here. Except for Earl Dawson. He was sitting against his tree exactly as I'd found him. Eyes closed, face peaceful, breathing slow and steady. I crawled over to him on my hands and knees, my body aching, my head still pounding from the pressure and the sudden return of normal sensation. "Earl, Mr. Dawson, can you hear me?" Nothing. No response. Eyes closed, peaceful. "Earl, please, wake up." I shook his shoulder, gently at first, then harder, lifted his eyelids and checked his pupils. Responsive to light, but sluggish. His pulse was steady, his skin was still cold. He was alive, breathing, heart beating, biologically functioning. But he wouldn't wake up. I tried everything. Called his name, clapped my hands next to his ear, poured water from my canteen on his face, pinched his arm hard enough to leave a mark. Nothing. Earl Dawson had surrendered to the silence, had given himself over to the void's peace completely, had let it take his consciousness, his awareness, his connection to the waking world. The void was gone now, defeated, driven back by noise and vibration into whatever place it had come from. But Earl's mind had gone with it. Or, rather, Earl's mind had stayed where the void had taken it, in the silence, in the peace, in the dark, warm place where nothing could reach him, and nothing could hurt him, and the world and all its noise and demands simply didn't exist. He was asleep, deeply, permanently, irreversibly asleep. And he was smiling. I sat next to him for a long time, listening to the forest come back to life around us. Birds singing, wind blowing, rain falling, the mountains remembering their voice. Earl Dawson would never hear any of it again. I radioed for help. Medical team, stretcher, full extraction. They arrived in 40 minutes, and I guided them through the recovering forest to where Earl sat against his tree. The lead paramedic, a woman named Lisa, checked him thoroughly. Blood pressure normal, heart rate normal, no sign of injury or illness, just complete, unresponsive unconsciousness. "How long has he been like this?" she asked. "I don't know. At least 24 hours, possibly longer. He'll need to go to the hospital, full neurological workup." "He won't wake up," I said quietly. She looked at me. "You don't know that." "I know it."
They carried him out on a stretcher, wrapped in blankets against the November cold. His face remained peaceful through the entire process. No flicker of awareness, no response to any stimulus. I followed them out, carrying the chainsaw in one hand, its engine finally silent,
the bar caked with leaf debris. Behind us, the forest sang.
Earl Dawson was admitted to Mission Hospital in Asheville on November 14, 2024. The neurological team spent 3 days running every test available: MRI, CT scan, EEG, PET scan, blood work, spinal fluid analysis. Everything came back normal. His brain was functioning, all regions active, neural pathways intact. No tumors, no lesions, no signs of stroke or aneurysm or any other condition that could explain why a man with a perfectly healthy brain simply refused to regain consciousness. The EEG readings were particularly strange. Earl's brainwaves showed activity consistent with deep, dreamless sleep. Not REM sleep, not the kind where you dream and occasionally surface toward waking. Something deeper, something the neurologists hadn't seen before. Dr. Rachel Kim, the lead specialist, called me personally to discuss the findings. "Ranger Crow, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "Go ahead." "The reason I ask is that his condition doesn't match any known medical phenomenon. He's alive, he's healthy, and his brain is working. But there is no indication that he will ever regain consciousness. His brain has simply decided to stay asleep." Decided? That's the word the team keeps coming back to. Not forced, not damaged. Decided. As if his consciousness made a choice to withdraw from waking life and is now maintaining that state indefinitely. I thought about Earl sitting against his tree, the peace on his face, the smile, the silence. "Dr. Kim, in your professional opinion, is he suffering?"
No. His stress hormones are at the lowest levels we've ever recorded. His heart rate is calm, his breathing is relaxed. He's in the deepest, most restful state a human body can achieve without being dead. If consciousness can be comfortable, Mr. Dawson is comfortable. Will he ever wake up? Another pause. I can't predict that, but I'll be honest with you, Ranger Crow. In 15 years of neurology, I've never seen a case where a healthy brain voluntarily chose unconsciousness and maintained it. Usually, if there's no physiological reason to stay asleep, the body naturally returns to consciousness. And if it doesn't, then Earl Dawson has found a state of being that we don't have a name for yet, and he seems perfectly content in it. I thanked her and hung up. Earl Dawson lives in a long-term care facility now, a private room, clean and quiet. The nurses keep the volume low, more out of professional practice than any instruction I've given. But I visit once a month, and every time I visit, I sit next to his bed and listen. Not to him. He doesn't make a sound, doesn't twitch or shift or groan in his sleep. I listen to the room, to the building, to the world outside the window. And I wonder if he can hear any of it, or if, somewhere in the silence he chose, the void is still with him, still feeding, still keeping him warm and peaceful, and perfectly, eternally quiet. I turned in my resignation 2 weeks after Earl Dawson was admitted to the hospital. My supervisor, a man named Patrick Ward, called me into his office and tried to talk me out of it. 14 years of service, perfect record, commendations, leadership recommendations. What's going on, Dan? This isn't like you. I need to leave. Because of the Dawson case? Dan, it was a tragic situation, but these things happen. You did your job. You found him alive. I found him alive, and I couldn't save him. You can't save everyone. You know that. This was different. He studied my face for a long time.
Different how? I didn't answer. How could I explain that the mountains had shown me something I couldn't unsee, that somewhere in the Appalachian forest something had been consuming sound and using a lonely old man as its anchor, that I'd fought it with a chainsaw and won, but the victory was hollow because the man I'd been sent to save was now locked in a sleep that no medicine could break. "I just need to go," I said. He signed the paperwork without another word. I spent my last week cleaning out my station, returning equipment, filing final reports, standing on the observation deck and watching the mountains I'd spent 14 years protecting, wondering what else was hiding in their hollows and valleys and ancient forests. On my last day, I drove out to Helen Marsh's property, Earl Dawson's neighbor, the woman who'd reported him missing. She was sitting on her porch when I arrived, wrapped in a quilt against the November cold. She looked up as I approached and nodded like she'd been expecting me. "How is he?" she asked. "Alive, not waking up." She nodded again. I thought so. "You didn't seem surprised when I told you about the silence, about the path through the woods." Helen looked out at the tree line. The forest beyond her property was normal now. Birds, wind, the sound of a living ecosystem going about its business. "I'm 67 years old, Mr. Crow. I've lived next to Earl Dawson for 30 of those years, and I've lived in these mountains my entire life." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "There are places in these woods where the silence has a weight to it. Places where you stop hearing the birds and the insects and the wind, and instead you hear nothing at all. Real nothing. The kind of nothing that makes you want to sit down and close your eyes and never open them again." "You've been there?" "Once, when I was young and foolish and thought I knew everything about these mountains." She smiled, but it was a sad smile, a knowing smile. The silence felt like coming home, like finally, after a lifetime of noise and demands and never being truly alone, someone had given me permission to rest. "What stopped you?" "My dog, a hound named Biscuit, came barking through the trees and dragged me back out by my collar, literally dragged me. Animals can hear it, you know, the silence. They can hear it and they know it's wrong." She pulled the quilt tighter around her shoulders. "Earl didn't have a dog, didn't have anyone to drag him back. He'd been sitting alone in that silence for years, getting closer and closer to the edge, and no one noticed because he was already so quiet, so alone, so easy to forget. I should have found him sooner." "You found him. That's more than anyone else did." She looked at me with eyes that were steady and clear and held no judgment. "Earl made a choice, Mr. Crow. Maybe not the choice we would have made, but his choice. The silence offered him peace, and he took it." "Is that what you think? That it was his choice?" "I think the void found a man who was already desperate for quiet, already desperate to stop hearing the world, and it gave him exactly what he wanted." She reached into the pocket of her quilt and pulled out a piece of paper, folded, old. "She gave me this about a week before he disappeared, said to give it to whoever came looking for him." I took the paper and unfolded it. It was a note, Earl's handwriting, shaky but deliberate. 2 sentences. "I've finally found the quiet I was looking for. Don't be angry. It's peaceful here." I stood on Helen Marsh's porch for a long time after that, holding Earl Dawson's note, listening to the forest, the birds singing, the wind blowing through the trees, the creek running over rocks in the distance. All the sounds of a world that Earl Dawson could no longer hear and didn't want to.
I stood on Helen Marsh's porch for a long time after that, holding Earl Dawson's note, listening to the forest, the birds singing, the wind blowing through the trees, the creek running over rocks in the distance.
all the sounds of a world that Earl Dawson could no longer hear, and didn't want to. I don't work for the Forest Service anymore. I live in a small apartment in Asheville, far from the mountains. I work a desk job now, something quiet and predictable that doesn't require me to walk through ancient forests or follow straight lines into the unknown. But I still hear it sometimes. Not the void. August in the Cascade foothills is supposed to be dry. The Meriwether River, which runs alongside Route 47 for 12 miles before disappearing into the backcountry, usually drops to a trickle this time of year. Exposed rocks, dry gravel beds, water so low you can walk across without getting your boots wet. That's why I wasn't worried when I started my patrol that Tuesday morning. My name is Marcus Webb. I've been a ranger with the state park system for 9 years, and the Meriwether River Trail is my responsibility. It's a beautiful stretch of wilderness, popular for day hikers and fishermen, mostly peaceful except for the occasional littering problem or lost dog. The trail follows the river for 8 miles, starting at the main access road and ending at Cathedral Falls, a modest 20-foot waterfall that's more scenic than impressive. During dry season, I patrol it twice a week, checking for trail damage, clearing debris, making sure the emergency call boxes are functional. It was 94 degrees that morning. I'd started early to avoid the worst of the heat, beginning my hike at 6 a.m. The air was still and heavy, the kind of oppressive silence that comes before a hot day. Even the birds seemed subdued. The river was exactly where I expected it to be. Low, sluggish, barely moving between the exposed boulders. I made good time on the trail, stopping every half mile to check the markers and photograph any maintenance issues for my report. By 8 a.m., I was 4 miles in, halfway to Cathedral Falls. That's when I saw her. She was standing on the opposite bank, maybe 30 yards downstream from where I'd stopped to drink some water. Just standing there, perfectly still. At first, I thought she was a hiker who'd gotten separated from her group. I raised my hand to wave, opening my mouth to call out and ask if she needed help. Then I got a better look at her. She was soaking wet. Her long, dark hair hung in dripping strands around her face. Her clothes, a white dress that looked old-fashioned somehow, clung to her body, water streaming from the hem in steady rivulets. But the river behind her was bone dry. I felt my hand freeze in mid-wave. My greeting died in my throat. The woman didn't move, didn't acknowledge me, just stood there, staring straight ahead at nothing, water pouring off her like she'd just climbed out of a swimming pool. "Miss, are you okay? Do you need assistance?" No response. She didn't even blink. I started moving toward her, planning to cross the river and check on her condition. Maybe she was in shock. Maybe she'd had some kind of accident upstream where the water was deeper. But when I looked down to navigate the rocks, looking for safe footing across the nearly dry riverbed, I heard it. A sound like distant thunder. I looked upstream and my blood went cold. Water was coming, a wall of it, dark and churning, rushing down the riverbed with impossible speed. It wasn't a normal flood. There was no gradual rise, no warning. 1 second, the river was a trickle. The next, a wall of water 3 feet high was bearing down on me.
I ran. I made it to higher ground just as the water hit, climbing onto a boulder cluster 15 feet above the normal waterline. The surge roared past below me, violent and muddy, carrying branches and debris that hadn't been there moments before. It made no sense. We were in the middle of a drought. There hadn't been rain in 6 weeks. The weather forecast showed clear skies for the next 10 days. Where was this water coming from? I looked back toward where the woman had been standing. She was gone. The opposite bank was empty, the space where she'd stood now underwater, completely submerged by the impossible flood. I waited on my boulder for 20 minutes, watching the water rage below me. Then, as suddenly as it had started, it began to recede. The level dropped rapidly, unnaturally fast, the river shrinking back to its previous trickle as if the flood had never happened. Within 30 minutes, the riverbed was dry again. I stood there, shaking, trying to make sense of what I just witnessed. Flash floods were possible, technically, but not like this. Not without rain. Not with this kind of sudden onset and equally sudden retreat. And not with a dripping wet woman appearing and disappearing like a ghost. I radioed base. "This is Webb on the Meriwether Trail. I just witnessed an unusual water surge near mile marker 4, requesting hydrological data on upstream conditions." The response came back 5 minutes later. "No unusual activity reported, Webb. Reservoir levels are normal. No dam releases scheduled. Are you sure about what you saw?" I looked at the muddy waterline on the rocks, still wet, already drying in the August heat. "Confirmed," I said. "I'll file a full report when I return." I didn't mention the woman. I didn't know how.
I cut my patrol short and headed back to the ranger station. Something was very wrong with the river, and I needed to understand what before someone got hurt. The first thing I did was check the geological surveys. The Meriwether River is fed by snowmelt from Mount Jefferson, channeled through a series of natural aquifers and underground streams. During dry season, the flow is predictable and stable. There's no mechanism for sudden floods without precipitation. Yet I'd seen one with my own eyes. Next, I reviewed incident reports. The Meriwether Trail had been open to the public for 63 years, and in that time, there had been surprisingly few accidents. A handful of twisted ankles, one bear encounter in 1987, a few cases of heat exhaustion. But there were 3 drownings. 1962, a woman named Sarah Whitmore, age 24, drowned while hiking alone. Her body was found near Cathedral Falls. 1979, a man named David Chen, age 31, drowned near mile marker 4. Witnesses reported the water level rose suddenly. 1998, a teenage girl named Rebecca Mills, age 16, drowned near the same location, also described as a sudden water surge. I felt my skin prickle. Mile marker 4. That's exactly where I'd seen the woman, where I'd nearly been caught by the flood. I dug deeper into the 1962 case. Sarah Whitmore had been a local school teacher, well-liked, engaged to be married. She'd been hiking on a Sunday morning in July and never came home. Search parties found her body 3 days later, caught in the rocks near the falls.
The official cause of death was accidental drowning, though the coroner had noted the water levels were unusually low that week, making it unclear how she drowned. There was a photograph in the file. Black and white, slightly blurred but clear enough. Sarah Whitmore had long dark hair and a heart-shaped face. She was wearing a white summer dress. My hands started shaking as I held the photograph. It was her. The woman I'd seen on the riverbank was Sarah Whitmore, dead for 62 years. I knew how this sounded. I knew what anyone would say if I reported this. I'd be sent for psychiatric evaluation, maybe put on leave. You don't stay employed as a ranger by claiming you've seen ghosts. But the evidence was undeniable. 3 drownings across 6 decades, all at the same location, all involving sudden water surges that shouldn't be possible. And Sarah Whitmore was the first. I spent the rest of the day researching her life. Local newspaper archives from 1962 painted a tragic picture. She'd been planning her wedding, set for August 15th. She'd been excited about her teaching position at Jefferson Elementary. She had family in the area, friends, a fiancé named Robert Mills who'd been devastated by her death. Wait, Mills. I checked the 1998 drowning report again. Rebecca Mills, age 16. I pulled up the genealogical records. Rebecca Mills was Sarah Whitmore's great-niece, granddaughter of Sarah's younger brother. The connection made my stomach turn. This wasn't random. The river, or whatever controlled it, was targeting Sarah's family. I needed to understand why she drowned in the first place. The circumstances had always been unclear. Sarah was a strong swimmer, familiar with the trail. The water levels were low. Nothing about her death made sense, unless it wasn't an accident. I found the answer in a journal article from a local historian, published in 1985. It was a footnote, barely 2 paragraphs, but it changed everything. In 1961, a small cemetery on the banks of the Meriwether River had been relocated to make way for the trail system. 27 graves were exhumed and moved to the county cemetery. The process had been rushed and poorly documented. Some graves were missed. Sarah Whitmore's drowning occurred less than a year after the trail opened. She hadn't drowned by accident. She drowned because someone had desecrated the ground she was now bound to protect. Or haunt.
I drove to the county clerk's office the next morning. If graves had been relocated, there would be records, maps, documentation of which plots had been moved and where they'd been reinterred. The clerk, a woman in her 60s named Donna, looked at me skeptically when I explained what I needed. The old Riverside Cemetery? That was 60-some years ago. Most of those records are in storage. I need to see them, I said. It's related to an ongoing safety investigation. She sighed, but led me to a basement archive room stacked with file boxes. Good luck, she said. Nobody's looked at this stuff in decades. It took me 4 hours to find what I needed. The relocation had been handled by a company called Cascade Memorial Services, contracted by the state. They'd mapped the cemetery, exhumed 27 graves, and transported them to new plots at Greenwood County Cemetery. But the original cemetery had held 32 graves. 5 were unaccounted for. The maps showed their approximate locations marked with question marks and notes like stone missing or plot unverified. The state had bulldozed the area anyway, paved over the remaining graves, and built the trail directly on top of them. One of those unmarked graves was located at what would become mile marker 4. I drove out to the trail that afternoon, parking at the access point and hiking directly to the location. I knew what I'd find before I got there. The trail at mile marker 4 ran along a slight elevation, a raised bed of gravel and packed dirt that followed the river's curve. The area had been extensively modified during construction, flattened, reinforced, paved with a layer of asphalt that had been covered over with gravel for a more natural appearance. I stood there, looking at the ground, imagining what lay beneath. A casket, bones,
The remains of someone who'd been buried with love and care, then abandoned when the cemetery was relocated. Someone the state had literally paved over. "I'm sorry," I said aloud, feeling foolish but compelled to speak. "I'm sorry this happened to you." The river behind me was silent, still, the water level exactly where it should be for this time of year. But I could feel her, a presence, watching, waiting. I pulled out my phone and called the county historian, a retired professor named Dr. Ellen Kaczynski, who'd written extensively about local history. "Dr. Kaczynski, this is Marcus Webb with the state parks. I need information about the old Riverside Cemetery, specifically about unmarked graves that weren't relocated in 1961. There was a pause. "That's oddly specific. May I ask why?" "Safety investigation," I said, keeping my tone professional. "There may be unmarked burial sites affecting trail stability." Another pause. "I see. Well, I did research on that cemetery years ago. Most of the unmarked graves were from the 1880s and 1890s before record-keeping became standardized. Poor families mostly, people who couldn't afford headstones." "Do you know if any of them were connected to drowning victims, specifically people who drowned in the Meriwether River?" The silence that followed was heavy. When Dr. Kaczynski spoke again, her voice changed. "You've seen her, haven't you?" My grip tightened on the phone. "Who?" "The woman in white, the one who appears before the river rises." I couldn't speak. Dr. Kaczynski sighed. "I've heard the stories for years, local folklore mostly dismissed as superstition. But there's always been talk of a woman who haunts the river, a bride who drowned before her wedding day." "Sarah Whitmore," I said. "That's the name that gets mentioned most often, yes, but the phenomenon predates her death. There were reports of a river ghost as far back as the 1890s. Sarah Whitmore may be the most recent victim, but she's not the original." My mind raced. Then who is? That's the question I could never answer. The original cemetery records burned in a courthouse fire in 1923. We know there was a grave there, unmarked, belonging to a young woman. She's mentioned in one journal entry from 1891, written by a minister who performed her burial. He described her as a poor child taken by the water before her joy could be realized. A bride, drowned before her wedding day. Just like Sarah Whitmore had drowned weeks before her wedding day. "Dr. Kaczynski, I need to know exactly where that grave is located." "She have coordinates from the original cemetery plat map, but I should warn you, Mr. Webb, multiple people have tried to address this over the years. Memorial plaques, prayer services, even an exorcism in the 1970s. Nothing worked. Whatever's there doesn't want to be appeased." "I have to try," I said. She gave me the coordinates. I thanked her and hung up. Then I stood at mile marker 4, looking at the ground, and began to plan. I couldn't dig up a state trail without authorization, and I couldn't get authorization without explaining why I wanted to dig, so I had to be smart about this. I requisitioned ground-penetrating radar equipment under the guise of checking for trail subsidence. The GPR unit arrived 2 days later, and I spent the afternoon of August 12th scanning the area around mile marker 4. The results were conclusive. Approximately 6 feet below the current trail surface, there was a distinct rectangular anomaly consistent with a burial vault. Wooden, probably pine, collapsed but still intact enough to register on the scan. This was it, the unmarked grave, the source of the haunting. I now had to decide what to do about it. Dr. Kaczynski had said that previous attempts at appeasement had failed, but those attempts had been performative, done from a distance, treating the grave as a curiosity rather than a person. Nobody had actually addressed the core problem. The woman buried here, whoever she was, had been forgotten. Her grave had been paved over, literally erased from history. And then Sarah Whitmore, another bride robbed of her future, had drowned in the same spot, her spirit drawn to the older, angrier presence already bound to this place. They weren't causing the floods out of random malice. They were crying out. They were demanding to be remembered. I could give them that. On the night of August 14th, I returned to mile marker 4 with supplies. A shovel, a heavy-duty pry bar, flowers, white roses, a small wooden cross I'd carved myself, and a silver ring I'd purchased that afternoon, plain and simple, the kind a poor family might have afforded in the 1890s, the kind a bride might have worn. I started digging at midnight. The August heat had broken, and the air was cool, almost cold. The river beside me was silent, too silent. I broke through the gravel layer, then the asphalt, then the compacted fill dirt beneath. My hands blistered, my back ached, but I kept digging, widening the hole, going deeper. At 4 feet down, my shovel hit something solid, wood, rotted and fragile but unmistakable. I'd found her. I cleared away more dirt, exposing the top of the casket. The wood was black with age and decay, held together more by the surrounding earth than its own integrity. I said a quiet prayer, then gently, carefully, I laid the roses on top of the casket. I'm sorry you were forgotten. I'm sorry your grave was taken from you. I'm sorry no one honored your memory. The air grew colder. The river behind me began to move. I'm placing this ring as a symbol, I continued, my voice shaking slightly. You were meant to be a bride. You deserved that joy. I can't give it back to you, but I can acknowledge what was taken. I set the silver ring carefully on the casket next to the roses. Then I planted the wooden cross at the head of the grave. May you be remembered. May you find peace. The river roared. I turned just in time to see the water rising, not gradually, but all at once, a wall of black water surging toward me with murderous intent. I tried to scramble out of the hole, but my foot caught on the edge of the casket. The water hit me like a physical blow, filling the grave, pulling me down. I went under, my lungs burning, my hands clawing at dirt and darkness. Through the murky water, I saw her. Not one woman. 2. The first was ancient, her features eroded by time, wearing the rotted remnants of a wedding dress from another century. The second was Sarah Whitmore, still young, still wearing her white summer dress, her eyes fixed on me with an expression I couldn't read. They reached for me. I stopped fighting. If they wanted me dead, I was already gone. If they wanted something else, struggling wouldn't help. So I let the water hold me, and I met their eyes, and I thought as clearly as I could, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what was done to you. I'm sorry you suffered. You deserved better. The older ghost's hand touched my face, cold as ice, gentle as a whisper. Then the water released me. I burst to the surface, gasping, clawing my way out of the grave. I lay on the trail, coughing up river water, my whole body shaking. When I could finally breathe again, I looked around. The river was calm, normal, the water level exactly where it should be. The grave I dug was empty of water, though the ground around it was soaked. The roses I'd placed were gone, dissolved or carried away. The wooden cross stood upright, and the silver ring was nowhere to be seen. I filled in the grave as the sun rose. By 7 a.m., I'd restored the trail surface as best I could, packing down the gravel, smoothing it over. You couldn't tell anything had been disturbed unless you looked very carefully. I filed a report about trail subsidence repair at mile marker 4. Nobody questioned it. Over the next 2 weeks, I patrolled the river trail daily, watching, waiting for signs of the haunting to return. Nothing happened. The river stayed calm. The water levels remained predictable. No dripping woman appeared on the opposite bank. On August 28th, I brought Dr. Kaczynski to the site. I showed her where I'd dug, what I'd found, what I'd done. She stood there for a long time, looking at the ground, then at the river. "I think you did it," she said quietly. "I think you gave them what they needed: acknowledgement, respect, a chance to be seen." "Will it last?" I asked. She shook her head. "I don't know. Ghosts are manifestations of unfinished business, unresolved trauma. You addressed the immediate cause, but memory is fragile. As long as this trail exists, as long as people walk over that grave without knowing what's beneath their feet, there's a risk the anger will return." "Then we need to make sure people remember," I said. It took 3 months and a lot of bureaucratic wrangling, but I managed to get a memorial plaque installed at mile marker 4. It reads, "In memory of those laid to rest at the old Riverside Cemetery, 1870 to 1961. May their spirits find peace in these hills they once called home." It doesn't name the bride from the 1890s. We don't know her name, but it acknowledges her. That's what matters. I haven't seen the ghost since that night. The river has been calm. No mysterious floods, no apparitions. But something changed. A week after I filled in the grave, I was doing a routine patrol at dawn when I noticed something glinting in the shallows near mile marker 4. I waded in, curious, and picked it up. It was a ring. Silver. Old. Tarnished green in places, but still intact. It wasn't the ring I'd left on the casket. This one was different, heavier, more ornate, and engraved on the inside, in letters so worn I could barely read them, was a date, June 14th, 1891. I stood there in the river, holding this impossible object, and I understood. This was her ring. The original bride's wedding ring, the one she'd been buried with over a century ago. She'd given it to me, not as a threat or a curse, but as a gift, as proof, as a way of saying she'd been real, she existed, she mattered. I keep it in a small wooden box on my desk at the ranger station. Sometimes, when I'm filling out paperwork or planning patrol routes, I open the box and look at it. A reminder that this job isn't just about maintaining trails and checking call boxes. It's about respecting the land and everyone who came before us, even the ones who've been forgotten. Especially the ones who've been forgotten. The Meriwether River flows quiet now. The trail is safe. Hikers walk mile marker 4 every day without incident, without knowing what lies beneath their feet. But I know. And somewhere, in whatever place ghosts go when their business is finished, 2 brides finally found their peace. The river remembers them. And so do I.